Oikos presents 15 Seconds of Strength.
Here we go. Steve's got a trunk full of groceries and no one to help him.
Oh, that's tough, Jim. Looks like a 5-trip load at least.
He grabs the first bag, the second. Bob, it looks like he's trying to do it all in one trip. He shimmies the door open, steps over the dog, and he stumbles.
Oh, right into the kitchen without missing a beat. Jim, now that's a man who eats his protein-packed Oikos.
With 15 grams of complete protein in each cup, Oikos Triple Zero can help build strength for every day. Oikos, stronger makes everything better.
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
This is VOCM Open Line. Call 709-273-5211 or 1-888-590-8626. The views and opinions of this program are not necessarily those of this station. The biggest conversation in Newfoundland and Labrador starts now. Here's VOCM Open Line host Paddy Daly.
Well, all right, and good morning to you. Thank you very much for tuning into the program. It's Tuesday, April the 9th. This is Open Line. I'm your host, Paddy Daly, and David Williams. He's producing the program. You'll be speaking with David when you pick up the phone to give us a shout to get in the queue and on the air. If you're in the St. John's metro region, the number to dial, 709-273-5211. Elsewhere, it's toll-free long distance, 1-888-590-VOCM, which is 8626. So how was your eclipse experience? Of course, if you're in the east end of St. John's like I was last evening, really didn't get to see a whole lot. Stood at the end of the driveway with those goofy solar eclipse glasses on. Caught a couple of faint glimpses as there were some sparse breaks in the cloud, but that's about it. Other parts of the province, like Burgeo, real big event in Burgeo, and rightfully so, given the relationship between Captain Cook in 1766 and the eclipse in Eclipse Island, so that was pretty cool to see. And the media coverage, unbelievable. And look, fair enough. For a once-in-a-lifetime experience, it was a big deal to a lot of folks, and I suppose had I been somewhere with clear skies, it might have been a bit more than meh for me, because that's all I really got out of it. But the coverage, pretty wild. I mean, viewing parties everywhere. Fogo Island Inn, sold out. International viewing party on Fogo Island with the guest of that Tony Hotel, so pretty wild stuff. There won't be another solar eclipse in this province till 2079, so once in a lifetime. For most, for sure. And predictably. So yesterday there was a huge spike in downloads and recently, the YouTube video of that tune eclipsed 1 billion views. So you knew full well that was going to be part of it yesterday. Anyway, check in Utica, New York at the 2024 Women's Ice Hockey World Championships. Canada against their long-time rival. Even though there's been back-to-back reverse sweeps at the rivalry series, at the Worlds, the Americans beat us last night, 1-0 in overtime. Debian, our goaltender, stood on her head. Americans outshot us 30-26. So that's the end of the preliminary round. No games for Canada today. The playoffs start, what's today, Tuesday? The playoffs start on Thursday. So we'll see who the matchup will be on that front. So they finish second in Group A, of course, behind said Americans. Pretty wild watching the NHL come down to real playoff battles for the last two spots in the Eastern Conference. Been pretty exciting to watch. Go Pittsburgh. And I'm not a Leafs fan, but I'm pretty intrigued with Austin Matthews' season. So 65 goals, he's got 5 games left to hit that magic number of 70. Matthews is amongst only 2 players in NHL history that have amassed multiple 60-goal seasons. So at the top of the list, you can guess it, Wayne Gretzky and Mike Bossy did it 5 times each. Then comes Mario Lemieux, Phil Esposito. They did it 4 times each. Brett Hull, that is, 3 times. Austin Matthews twice. Pavel Bure twice. Steve Yzerman twice. Yzerman, the most underrated player of a generation. Yari Curry twice. So 5 games left for Matthews. Let's see if he can pull it off. And speaking of the great one, it was on this date, 1987. For the third time, Wayne Gretzky scored 7 points, a goal and 6 assists in a Stanley Cup game, and passes Jean Beliveau as the all-time playoff scoring champion. And if you watch the Jays win their home opener last night in the closed Rogers Centre, on this date in 1965, the first ever indoor baseball game was played at the 8th wonder of the world, the Houston Astrodome. Okay, let's keep going. All right, when cannabis was first legalized in the country in October 2018, there was a lot of applause on one side of the political aisle and frustration and consternation, a word I love to use, on the other side of the aisle. It has come with a lot of unexpected twists and turns. When it was legalized, businesses thought this is a cash cow. We are going to make off like bandits. Same thing that governments thought. Neither one really came to pass. I mean, provincial and federal governments way over forecast the potential revenue side based on taxes on the cannabis products. The black market did not go away. Consequently, there was downward pressure on the price per gram for the legalized producers and retailers. And in this province, it's been pretty tattered history. So we remember Canopy Growth and the silly contract we signed with Canopy Growth for a remittance abatement for their returns to the provincial government. $100 million invested and didn't produce a kilogram. You wonder whether or not there's an opportunity to repurpose that hydroponic facility on the White Hills for something more pragmatic, like maybe food production. But I'll leave that aside. And then we find out that Argentia Gold, they're also shuttering their doors. $16 million, and as the news story says, up in smoke. A couple of these organizations still continue to do business in the province, and that's Atlantic Cultivation and Oceanic Relief on the Burin Peninsula. Atlantic Cultivation here in the city of St. John's. Apparently they have found a stable footing. So I know for many of you, the business of cannabis is not really a concern, but also since October 2018, there has been an uptick in people using cannabis products. There has been an unfortunate uptick in hospitalizations, many of which are related to using edibles, because I'm told, when you smoke marijuana, you get that immediate rush from the THC. If you're consuming an edible, there's a delayed reaction, and so consequently, I guess, people are thinking, well, I just ate that particular gummy bear, and I don't feel anything, so maybe I'll have another. Next thing they know, they're blitzed and end up in the hospital. So the cannabis, if you want to talk about cannabis from any angle, we can do it. Now, there doesn't seem to be a big surge in driving while under the influence of cannabis. It was always against the law, so the worry was when it was legalized that it would normalize the concept of smoking or eating or using an oil or whatever the case may be and get behind the wheel, but that doesn't seem to have happened. And of course, when we talk about drugs, legal or otherwise, every time you see a drug bust now, it comes with associated use, or pardon me, the people have firearms. Every single time. And it's pretty wild and it's out of hand. And this one story, you wonder what it takes in the young life of a 14-year-old to all of a sudden be accused of murder. You remember this story? There was a teenager on the West Coast was involved in a death just prior to Christmas, and now recently in the city of Mount Pearl, a 14-year-old apparently killed a 65-year-old woman. Not a whole lot of the way details out there. We don't know the relationship. We're told they were familiar with each other. We've all heard the rumors and rumbles. But now the story is that the Crown is seeking an adult sentence if and when this young fella is convicted. So under the Youth Criminal Code of Canada, a murder conviction carries up to 10 years in prison. Of course, as an adult, it can mean life in prison. So once those details start to roll out, and we're always going to be restricted given the fact that the person accused is a minor, but it's really a devastating story to think, how did a 14-year-old, or at any age, I suppose, find yourself in a position where you're willing to kill someone? But at 14, that story just really scares me and my hair stands on end. You want to talk about it, we can do it. And on that front, there's another fellow who was a Syrian immigrant. They've been in St. John's for 10 years, and he was repeatedly threatening and hurting his children and his wife. The courts were told in no uncertain terms that the woman thought her life was in jeopardy. Why? Because the man told her repeatedly, I'm going to kill you. And so, as a high-risk offender, out on bail, he followed through with exactly that pledge to his wife. He killed her. So the question becomes, how many high-risk offenders are out there? There's a story on the West Coast about a fellow named Matthew O'Quinn. He is a high risk to reoffend, and yet they're out walking around. We know that the percentage of people at Her Majesty's Penitentiary that are simply on remand, have not been convicted of anything, is in and around 60%. But how do we handle, especially when we're talking about domestic violence? Because if someone is willing and wanting to hurt or kill their partner, orders of protection and bail circumstances and supervised bail is probably not going to keep them from elevating their level of violence against those that they have an intimate relationship with. So we've got to wrap our minds around that, and those stories are absolutely devastating. But if you want to talk about that in any front, We can do it. All right, let's move to one of the big stories in the province. And, of course, that would be, and it might be an eye roller for some, but it's still a massive industry that has implications province-wide. And that's the snow crab. And every other species, yes. I hear from lobster harvesters that are frustrated that we don't include their frustrations in the conversation, and we can and we will. But in the current circumstances surrounding crab, so the FFAW has been clear, as have the protesters who are dues-paying members of the union, but are speaking with their own voices. And one of the Facebook forums where they're back and forth on some of the concerns of the day, asking for continued solidarity. You know, don't bend to the pressure, because that's going to be one of the real keys. And you know full well there's got to be some harvesters out there that are crewed up, geared up, and are probably willing to go, even at this low price, but of course don't want to run afoul of their fellow harvester. It's the concept of the bloody price-setting process. So when they talk about percentage of the market, if the formula, the price-setting panel, was using ASP's numbers between 2016 and 2023, harvesters would have ended up with roughly $450 million less. It's amazing stuff. Okay, market value of crab increase, and then so the union says so should their market price. What they say is the formula caps the percentage of the market share at 37% of market values greater than $8 Canadian. That says it's historically unprecedented what's currently in place. All right. There's also many other tangents to this story. Outside buyers, yes. Producing capacity, sure. Evaluating foreign ownership and the controlling agreement. This has been settled in court. I can't for the life of me understand how it continues to be part of the fishery is the processor-owned boats, because that would be what they call a controlling agreement, and you're not supposed to have them. Even though we have one local harvester who was on the show, Jimmy Lee Foss, has admitted he was involved in one of these controlling agreements. But the whole concept of it's not going to hurt plant workers, I guess it remains to be seen how aggressive and how active outside buyers might be in the province and shipping snow crab for this conversation out of province for processing. But it's already hurting some plant workers. For Craig Party, the PC member for Bonavista, he spoke on this program yesterday talking about the massive plant in Bonavista, the largest of its kind in the province, employing some 400 people. Without any product coming in for processing, of course, the doors remain closed. The problem there is that employment insurance has lapsed for some 58 employees at that particular fish plant. Now they're looking at things like income support. So as much as we don't know whether or not outside buyers are going to have real negative impact on plant workers, we know that the tie-up at this moment in time is. So if you want to be a harvester or a processor, a plant worker, or anybody involved in the fishery, or an outside looker who'd like to chime in, we're happy to take that call. Here this morning. Okay. I see some money flowing for additional mental health and addiction services to U-Turn. And they're talking about the different peer support through the various means. In-person, online, telephone, self-help and education groups weekly. $84,000 is the number. All right, they're talking about those investments to be made at the Grace Centre in Humberwood. You know, there's many solid mental health advocates out there who, for the last 175 weeks, including Christy Allen, have been taking their signs to Confederation Building and other places, asking about long-term access to mental health. And we know that there's a real gap in addiction services here. So even if you're not someone struggling or suffering with either of the aforementioned, we're doing a really poor job. A really poor job. Then you add in what I can't believe we haven't heard from one single member of Parliament who talks about cost of living and pressures and anxiety and depression and mental illness and access to services, and yet at the exact same time, pennies on the dollar that went by the wayside last week regarding funding for Wellness Together and Pocket Well. These are alarming developments. You look at some of the pots of money and the billions of dollars and hundreds of billions of dollars and the soaring deficit and debt in this country, and yet we can't fund what is so critically important to the overall well-being of the community. It might not be you struggling, but it might be your family member, and what that means for your social circle, and what that means for your ability to work. You know, your ability to stave off loneliness and all the negative impacts that are associated with that. So those types of things are just mind-boggling as to why there is not more attention on the federal and or provincial front, I would suggest, on those two issues. Speaking of that, wouldn't it be nice to get an update from the provincial government as to exactly what's going on at the Comfort Inn? On these snowy, chilly mornings, there's still people living in tents, not just behind the Colonial Building, but other parts of the province. And yes, the government thought in the form of a transition house or transition opportunity, and we don't even know if it's going to work, and it better. 3-year lease at $7 million per year for $21 million. We don't even know who's there, how many are there, the presence of wraparound services, the vetting or the eligibility criteria to get one of those 140 rooms. This cannot be a case of it just turns into a more posh setting as an emergency shelter. So I really think it's incumbent on the government to give us an update here. Start filling in some of the blanks. We can talk about additional cost. We can talk about the impact in the neighbourhood where the Comfort Inn is there alongside Airport Heights. But we really don't know what's going on. And that's a lot of money to be spent on something that's obviously important, but with no real understanding about what's actually happening at that hotel, then we'll leave it up to you. And this is not in an effort simply to rile you up or stir the pot, but we're going to have to hear from more members of the House of Assembly about the recommendations from the Commission on their salaries, the recommendation of a $25,000 increase. I don't begrudge them a reasonable rate of pay, but a one fell swoop $25,000 raise seems to be untoward. Then you look at the members of Parliament and their increase in pay. Not one of them, even though they get on their bully pulpit and talk about their concerns for Canadians and the cost of living issues, and probably simply willing to accept that bump in their pay. Ridiculous. Then the legislation table to delay the next federal election by 1 week to accommodate some 80 additional members of Parliament to qualify for their pension. Equally ridiculous, if not worse. All right, how are we doing on phone there, David? Couple before we get to you. So, we're not getting a whole lot of traction on this issue in the form of phone calls. I do receive some emails. But the inquiry into foreign interference in the elections of 2019 and 2021 in particular, we're never going to hear everything we would like to hear based on privacy issues and the protection of intelligence. But it looks quite clear that there was plenty of information about Chinese interference. Plenty of it. There is also coming to light that the Prime Minister, who repeatedly told us that he had no briefings that specified Chinese interference, whether it be with the 11 candidates or other organizations or pressure on Chinese diaspora, but apparently he was briefed. So we're going to hear from Katie Telford, the Chief of Staff for the Prime Minister, this week. But the testimony has been, in some regard, eye-opening. Will we hear any more from Katie Telford today than we did when she presented in front of the parliamentarians? I don't know. I guess we'll follow along today. But the information is really quite clear. Some of the briefing notes that have been tabled at the inquiry are obviously pretty eye-opening. Here's one of them that comes from a report called Assertions in Media Reporting. This regarding back to the Globe and Mail's news story regarding intelligence leaks. We know the PRC, the People's Republic of China, clandestinely and deceptively interfered in both the 2019 and 2021 general elections. In both cases, foreign interference was pragmatic in nature and focused primarily on those supporting to be viewed either pro-PRC or neutral on issues of interest of the PRC government. So there was 11 candidates targeted, 13 staff members, multiple political parties were involved. The transfer of cash through multiple entities in an effort to shield it from the CSIS organization and or the general public and or the political parties. It basically sounds like it came to a breakdown of communication. Like former CPC leader Aaron O'Toole said, other leaders outside the Liberals were sort of lulled into an air of complacency. Why? Because they weren't told about what was going on. So we'll hear from Ms. Telford this morning, but it's not looking good. And I really think it's unfortunate that when these stories were breaking, all hands were really leaning on it as a critically important piece of political conversation and discourse. And now, they lean on other things, notably the carbon tax, and on that. So 3 months prior to the carbon tax increasing by 3 cents, the price of gas went up in many parts of the country about 30 cents. So we can talk about the relationship between the two. And yesterday, the Minister of Defence, Bill Blair, rolled out new defence policy. Okay. A lot of focusing on military surveillance, combat capabilities in the Arctic. We know that there's been a newfound the conversation about NATO commitments and, of course, 2% of GDP, which would be the floor, not the ceiling. In this country, we've been spending about 1.23 to 1.25% of GDP on national defense. Now with the commitment of, let's see here, $8.1 billion in new defense spending over the next 5 years. Commitments to add an additional $73 billion in defense spending over the next 2 decades. The problem with the announcements is that there doesn't seem to be any immediate moves to be made. A little bit of kick the can down the road yet again. The Canadian Armed Forces, if they had to mobilise today, are only 58% prepared. We know that they're short over 15,000 troops. So the spending increase, which brings us to about 1.76% of GDP, welcomed in some corners, but the concern regarding military preparedness today is not really being addressed. We can talk about, Arctic sovereignty and hypersonic missiles and new surveillance aircraft. And if that's a good piece of good news for you, or if you want to talk about defense, I'm happy to do that, or anything else. And very last one before we get to you. So the arrived I'll call it a scandal. Why? Because it's scandalous. Even when the Federal Auditor General tried to dig into who knew what when and how much this app cost, we don't really know. Why? Because there's not even a paper trail to follow, which is utterly pathetic when we talk about government procurement. So somewhere in the neighborhood of $60 million. The issue now, and this is pretty interesting stuff. So one of the founders of GC Strategies, a partner named Christian Firth, he's been held in contempt of Parliament because he refused to answer a bunch of questions in his last appearance in front of the Operations Committee. And for what is a very rare occurrence, he's been not only held in contempt of Parliament, but he's been ordered to appear what they call before the bar. And that's not like the Legal Society or the Law Society bar. This is just a brass bar in Parliament where he's going to be admonished by the Speaker. It's happened very rarely. I mean, their involvement in this application and the way government has dealt with GC Strategies, which is a very small outfit operating out of what people refer to their mother's basement. But here's the issue. There's been a couple of MPs admonished by the Speaker in recent history. In 1991, it was MP Ian Waddell was admonished. In 2002, it was Keith Martin. But Firth will be the third private citizen to be admonished since 2013. The most recent case was in 2021 when then President of the Public Health Agency of Canada appeared before the House agency and failed to turn over the documents to a committee relating to the firing of those 2 scientists who were in cahoots with the Chinese at the National Microbiology Laboratory in Winnipeg. So he's going to be compelled to answer questions and to be admonished by the Speaker. That's pretty wild stuff. We're on Twitter. We're VOCM Openline. Follow us there. Email address is openline@vocm.com. When we come back, let's have a great show. Trevor's going to kick us off talking about the Canadian Forces. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's begin on line number 1. Trevor, you're on the air.
Hey, how are you today, Mr. Daly?
I'm okay. How about you?
Good. You got no feedback or nothing coming through?
Nope, pretty clear. Go ahead.
All right, diddly. So I'm just calling in this morning to voice my concerns on current Canadian Armed Force members that are joining or living their vehicles and going to food banks. I mean, it's 2024. It's time to, we all need to stop holding our hands and singing Kumbaya. Wake up and smell the roses and start giving away our money and start actually looking after our own people here in Canada. And for someone to be living out of their car, it's unreal. Like, here you are going to sign up to serve your country, and you're living out of your car and going to a food bank. Like, come on. I mean, some bases do have housing for new members, and some bases don't. So the ones that don't are supposed to go and rent off the economy or buy a house or whatever. And back when I was serving, there was a PLD, a post-living differential, that helped you offset the costs. Well, that hasn't been changed in years. I don't know if it's been changed lately, but yeah, that's where we're at right now, and I find it very disgraceful myself.
Members of the Canadian Armed Forces, they're part of the story on a variety of fronts. We hear some of the data about how many of them are living through the paper warfare, trying to deal with Veterans Affairs Canada. We know the numbers that find themselves incarcerated. We know the numbers that find themselves in a death spiral of addiction. And then it gets even more disgraceful when we've been told that some members that are looking for additional supports, of which is very difficult to deal with Veterans Affairs apparently, and what were they offered as a solution? Medical assistance in dying. I mean, it's not just about members of the military, but the way that conceptually, if someone's in lifelong pain with no hope for survival and is choosing through consultation with the doctor and the doctors and the family to avail of MAID, that's one thing. But if you go in and say, I just need additional levels of help and support, and that's one of the first things offered, is that as a way out, it's just pathetic. So the way we treat members of the military currently enlisted, considering the fact that we're only 50% prepared, associated with capabilities and capacity, we're 15,000 plus troops short. So on the current active members and the retired veterans, we simply don't do good enough on their behalf.
And speaking on that part, more or less, like last month I was going to say, but so for a young member to get in the Canadian Armed Forces, he has a roof over his head during his basic training. They have a roof over their head during their trades training, but it's when you transition from your trades training and you get posted to an actual physical base or unit, then it's very stressful, we'll say. So the housing on the bases are mostly for families, the young single no-hook private, they more or less have to fend for themselves because, let's be real, the families come first, and then the young crowd, they're low on the totem pole, and they're not going to be pulling in, say what a corporal is pulling in after 4 or 5 years. And a corporal's salary is a decent livable salary, but when you got a young no-hook private pulling in peanuts, I mean, the last thing that they should be concerned about is where they're going to hang their hat. I mean, you can't have a functional service member do their job correctly unless you address the problem, which is they need to have either a better rate and pay, or they need to have some sort of parameters there to help assist them get somewhere where they can hang their hat and they haven't got to go to a food bank. I mean, if we got politicians out there that can just say, "Oh, guess what? Let's just make let's give ourselves a raise," and now they want postpone an election a week or so. Might have my facts wrong, but and so they can get their pensions. I mean, I myself, I'm retired. I got medically released. I'm playing the game with the Veterans Affairs. I got stuff that I've been waiting for months on now that's ridiculous. And it's just, it's almost like you're left out hanging in the wind there once you're out of the Canadian Armed Forces. But I got nothing bad to say about the time I served. I was treated well. I enjoyed my time serving, and I got to meet a lot of great people. And, that's what it's all about.
I appreciate your time this morning, Trevor. Thanks for calling.
No problem. Have a good day.
You too, sir. Take care.
Bye.
Yeah, I mean, there's something patently wrong. So the announcement yesterday, we don't know how that coincides with long-term strategic plans necessarily, but an increase in spending on GDP, okay, that's been one of the commitments we've made to NATO, and of course 2% is the floor, not the ceiling. And when we talk about the immediacy of need, whether it be for active members and or veterans, retired veterans, we're coming up short. I mean, to know, with all the focus in on military preparedness, and curiously, when Canadians are surveyed in the recent past, more and more Canadians seem to be on side with increasing capacity, readiness and funding. So The problem then becomes that defence announcement yesterday. It doesn't really feel like we're going to do something in the very short or near term. Of course, recruitment has proven to be very, very difficult. We're 15,000 plus troops short. We're only 58% prepared if we were called upon to mobilise today. So there's lots of concerns to be voiced inside the world of veterans and active members of the Canadian Armed Forces. Let's take a break. When we come back, Rick is there to talk about Air Canada. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. I know, right, I meant to mention this off the top. So, April 9th being the day where we're supposed to hear from the provincial government about an update as to where the proposal from World Energy GH2 stands. The Minister's office has confirmed that today is the day. What time the announcement is going to be made, we don't know, but I'm trying to get that information because lots of people in the province interested in that one. Let's go to line 3. Rick, you're on the air. Hi, Rick.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well this morning. How about you?
Good. Doing well this morning, better than I've been doing for the past few days.
What's going on?
Well, for Christmas, we gave our daughter hockey tickets to go to Montreal because she's really, past couple of years, she took a big interest in hockey, and she got into ice hockey, and she made the floor hockey team for school and that. So for Christmas, we put together a trip to go to Montreal, and we had 3 days, holidays booked, and we were going to fly into Montreal and take in the Toronto-Montreal game because I'm a Toronto fan and the rest of the family is a Montreal fan, so, fun times, right? Yep. So we left on Thursday, and as everybody's aware, there was a big snowstorm in Montreal, so the flights got canceled, which was understandable. Like, we did have tickets booked for Tampa Bay Thursday night, but we only bought cheap tickets for Tampa Bay because our big game was the big Toronto-Montreal game because the family, two family, the members like each team, right? Yep. So when we got to the airport, we went there like everybody else that, was inconvenienced. And we said, look, we got to be there for Saturday night. We don't really care about missing this game, but Saturday night, that's our Christmas gift. What can you do to get me off the island? Like, I got to get up there for Saturday night. So Air Canada, they don't send any extra flights. So basically, the lady at the airport said, the only thing I can do to get you off the island is you have to be in St. John's for 5:50 a.m. on Saturday morning. But we can't get you to St. John's. There's no flights available to go to St. John's, so you got to get yourself to St. John's. I said, well, that's fine. I said, we drove in from Burgeo. I mean, the vehicle's by the door. We can drive to St. John's. I said, no, my question to you is, we're supposed to fly back to Deer Lake. Can you switch it so we fly back to St. John's? Because our vehicle will be in St. John's 7 hours away. So the earliest she could get us back St. John's, we would have landed Tuesday morning, which the holidays would have been over. So we said, fine, leave the tickets to Deer Lake. We'll leave the vehicle here. We'll go down on the DRL bus. So, but I said, can you change it so we come back Monday morning? Because we're not going to get there till Saturday morning, and we got to return Sunday morning. We're going to have 24 hours or less there. And she said, yep, no problem. I'll change it to Monday morning. So we got an hotel. We stayed in Corner Brook that night. So 11:30 next morning, I was back at the airport because I had to put my vehicle in the long-term parking. And the announcement come for pre-boarding for Montreal, the same flight we had the day before. So I went in open, maybe 3 people didn't show so we could get on. So I goes up to the counter. I said, ma'am, by any chance, did 3 people not show so we can get to Montreal today? She said, sir, we're overbooked by roughly 20 people. She said, we're putting people on PAL Airlines, sending them St. John's to get flights out. I said, excuse me? You're putting people on PAL Airlines to get them to St. John's. What about us? Like, we were supposed to fly yesterday. We weren't offered to get on another airline to get to St. John's. And she basically passed me a card. She said, call this number, sir. There's nothing I can do for you. So I said, that's fine. I don't have time to argue with you. I got to catch the DRL bus. So I got a cab. I went to the big stop. We jumped on DRL. We made St. John's at 9:15 that night. My sister picked me up, and we went to bed around midnight because we had to get up at 3 a.m. to get ready. At 4 a.m. we had a cab booked to come get us to the airport to fly out at 5:50. At 1:20 in the morning, we get a text come. Flight to Montreal canceled due to mechanical. Well, I tried getting over to Air Canada at 20 after 1 in the morning, Saturday morning. We left home on Thursday, mind you. So I got my sister's Jeep. I drove to the airport. I got there around 2 a.m. They don't open to 3. So I waited. I was the first one at the wicket. The lady comes to serve me. I explained my situation. You know, I've been on the road for 2 days. I said, like, this is a Christmas gift. What can you do to get me to Montreal? Nothing. She could not get me in Montreal until 9:30 Montreal time. Well, the game started at 7. The game would have been over.
Okay, so ultimately, I mean, everyone who's travelled even a little bit and or frequently will have run into these types of mechanical excuses. You know, when it's real legitimate weather issues, then I think we can all accept that because that's just nature of the beast.
Oh, I accepted that.
So where are we now? So it didn't work out. I assume you didn't make it to the game on time?
We didn't get to the game.
You never made it to the game?
I spent $1,000 to travel 2,000 kilometers around Newfoundland on a DRL bus because I had to get back on the DRL bus the next morning at 8 a.m. to come back to Deer Lake, get my vehicle. So I left on Thursday to return home Saturday night with $1,000 spent in travel, chasing flights, and I never got off to Newfoundland Island. I lost my hotel in Montreal because on Thursday they changed it to accommodate me where I was coming on Saturday, and I was supposedly staying Sunday night. So, like they said, you're 3 days into your booking. We can't give you nothing back for your hotel. I'm out 2 lots of hockey tickets. I mean, I spend almost $800 on a DRL bus going back and forth the island on a flight that they were supposed to put me on, which gave out because of mechanical, not weather, mechanical, right? So I'm out maybe $3,000 or $4,000. Family trip is over. We didn't get anywhere. And like I said, I traveled 2,000 kilometers, spent $1,000 chasing a flight, which I never got.
Yeah, no, it's
over
dreadful.
3 days.
Dreadful. The last time I flew, we had direct flights in and out of Montreal just to find out that we had lost those flights and had a milk run up and a milk run back and zero compensation. And now their excuses were fairly flimsy at that time too. So the only avenue of recourse here is to file a formal complaint with the Canadian Transportation Agency, of which there are some, I don't know, last count I saw was 60,000 complaints in the backlog. Now Air Canada has made a habit in the recent past of offering people pennies on the dollar as in compensation before they get a ruling from CTA. So are you going to file a formal complaint?
Well, I'm going to do something. I mean, right now, when I got home that night, I told the lady, there's no way I can go to Montreal. I said, I missed the game and just go up and come back the next day. I said, I just can't do it. So I said, cancel my flight. And she said she would get in St. John's, the lady at the wake, so I'll cancel your flight. You'll get a full refund there, so you can go after the airlines for the rest of it, or do something up, try to get something back. When I got home, I was getting notifications that my plane was taking off at 10:20. I mean, I didn't return. The time I got in Burgeo was almost 8:30 at night. The time I got back from St. John's. So, anyways, I finally got over to Air Canada. I was like, "Ma'am, this was supposed to be canceled today," and she was like, "No, didn't get done. We're not giving you a refund." They wouldn't even gonna give me a refund for my flights. I mean, it's crazy. I never seen customer service so poor before. I mean, we didn't get so much as offered even a mail voucher. Nothing. But yet they took people and flew them across the island the next day so they would make their flights. What about all us people that was there Thursday? Why we didn't offer any conversation because of weather. But the next day they overbooked the flight and they were putting them on different airlines.
Well, that's the trick, isn't it? You just hit the nail on the head there. A lot of these snarls come to pass because flights have been overbooked. And so if there's any interruption in service because of weather or mechanical issues or they don't have a crew, then what you have inside a backlog with already overbooked flights, then people just they start picking winners and losers, and unfortunately you came up in the loser category. So Rick, the only place for you to turn now is the Canadian Transportation Agency. I'm not going to suggest that you're going to get any satisfying outcome here, but it is legitimately the only place to turn.
Canadian Transportation Agency?
Yeah, that's who fields complaints.
Okay. Yeah, well, I'm going to have to do something because, I mean, they were just heartless. I mean, like I said, I mean, I'm out so much money, and my daughter, I mean, that was her Christmas gift. It's gone. I mean, it's not every day you can throw together $4,000 or $5,000 and take off on a trip. I mean, and if it was weather related, I wouldn't even bothered it because, I mean, it's weather related, but it wasn't. This was mechanical. We were the only flight that didn't get out that day down there.
File that complaint and keep me in the loop. It's not going to be a very quick turnaround because, as I mentioned, they have tens of thousands of formal complaints that have been filed inside that backlog. And Once those complaints are filed, there's a notification to airlines, which has seen Air Canada trigger pennies on the dollar worth of compensation offers, and of which, if you accept it, then even if CTA rules in your favour for a bigger refund, you can't get it, because that's part of the caveats associated with settling with Air Canada directly. So do that and let me know how you make out, Rick. And I'm sorry to hear that happen, especially when everyone's so excited to get to a big game. And I mean, there's nothing quite like a night in Montreal and Toronto at the Bell Centre, just amazing stuff. So I'm sorry that happened to you and your family.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
I appreciate your time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
We'll take another one here, Dave. Before the break, let's go to line number 2. Holly, you're on the air.
Hey, Patty, how's it going?
Okay, you.
I want to talk about the flooding on the West Coast this morning. Just want to go over it slightly. Give me a sec there, I have some notes. Basically, I can recall a similar flood to what happened last week in Cape St. George in December of 1990. Believe it or not, I was 7 years old, and I had just started school, and we were in the old wooden structure of, they called Notre Dame de Cap at the time, Our Lady of the Cape. And I can recall the toilets and the washrooms starting to overflow and whatnot. Okay? That's some of my first memories from school in Cape St. George, actually. The difference between back then and today, obviously, is the added wear and tear to the roadways. I mean, there's obviously more vehicles. There's bigger vehicles on the roads today than there was back then. And that's causing a strain on the aging infrastructure, obviously. I wouldn't so much look at it as a climate event simply because, I can recall it 35 to 37 years ago, okay? I'm 41 today, my birthday. And, so that would be 37 years ago. 34 years ago today. So to me, it's like a 35, 40-year event. And the difference being, last time it happened in 1990, it happened in the winter. And there was about a foot and a half of snow on the ground that December. And it melted off. And it caused the same effect that you've seen up towards the end of the Cape when all the rocks came across the road from just like a washout area. And Patty, I don't know if you're familiar with the terms isostatic depression and isostatic rebound.
Continue.
Well, basically, that's like ice age terms, like when the ice melts. Basically, when we were under the ice cap, the isostatic depression pushed the land down. And when the ice melted off, the isostatic rebound, which, by the way, southern Labrador is still somewhat experiencing, the land began to rise with the water. And this most especially happened in Port-au-Port. I'm going to speak to my backyard alone. The geology of Port-au-Port, other than the fact, it's shale and limestone and whatnot, when you walk in the woods and you walk in the background, you walk up the brooks and the waterways and whatnot. When you look towards the east especially, you can see where the isostatic rebound took place in the land. And there's old ancient runoffs that are about 40 to 65, 70 feet above. Say, I'm going to use Roses Brook for an example. So you're down at the bottom of Roses Brook, and about 50 to 70 feet upward, you can see ancient waterways that connect at one time to the same brook, right? That are empty today, okay?
Okay, so this is in reference to, it's continental rebound. So let's fast forward to today, because this will regard the weight of the ice age, not of the recent past. So fast forward to today.
March 4, right on. Obviously, there's a bit more snow on the ground than it would be in a December month, right? So you get the same type of weather system that happened in 1990. There's more snow in the woods up on the mountains, which, by the way, has little to no topsoil. I would say it amounts to little to under a foot of topsoil, the black soil itself, okay? And suddenly all the snow goes into the valleys, which are the ancient runoffs that came out of the sea due to the isostatic rebound, okay? And these old runoffs fill up suddenly, and guess where they're coming? They're coming right into the community, sir. It has very little to do with climate change and all to do with the geology of the region and the ancient history of the region, which basically had it under an ice cap. And if you look at certain areas of the peninsula, especially Sheva's Cove, there's a part of Sheva's Cove, it's private land, but they call it Heart-Shaped Cove. And it's, in fact, an ancient cataract. Do you know what a cataract is?
I do, but let's fast forward to today. What's the implications of whatever's happening on Port-au-Port today, or the washouts at Cape St. George, or the World Energy proposal? Let's get to that part of it.
I mean, to deal with the incoming infrastructure that's going to be placed there in the background, I mean, if the government is, as all stakeholders in this project, whether it be the population of Port-au-Port, the government, the company itself, or whoever's required to maintain these roads, because not only do you have a population, you'll be bringing in a crew of workers that will be reliant on the roads as well, correct?
Well, of course, they're going to have to get to the site for construction. That's right.
So, at that point, I feel that the current repairs that took place, although needed to be done, I agree. It's glad I'm done in due time. I mean, that's happy to see. However, I truly do believe that as Mr. Risley, World Energy, GH2 are true stakeholders with the people of the Port-au-Port Peninsula, even if there's a slight disagreement there among certain groups, okay? If he's truly honest in his position in stakeholder capitalism in the 2030 agenda and forwarding the Paris Accord SDGs here, that they make a significant investment when it comes to the aging infrastructure on the whole of Port-au-Port, to the point that, for example, Roses Brook should be replaced with a proper steel bridge, very similar to the one they did at Romaines about a year or so ago.
Yeah, the apparent engineering analysis says a bridge is not required at this time. They have indeed scheduled a replacement of culverts with a 27% increased capacity. Just because of the time of the clock, we're going to leave it there. I'll give you the last word, Holly.
Yes. Just because of the geological circumstances of the area, you're putting the people at risk. Any added infrastructure to the area, quite obviously, will make a potential problem worse. With that being said, the worst flooding I can recall between this would be in 2005, and it happened in September. So that was when the Abitibi Mill closed down and McDonald's in Stephenville got flooded out. But it all depends on the time of year it happens and how much snow is on the ground.
Of course.
But the channeling on the hills where they're planning to put the turbines will have a cause and effect that will be detrimental unless they put in proper infrastructure that addresses the environmental situation, the geological situation, and proper climate change, sir.
We'll see what the minister brings to bear today. Apparently today is the day we're going to find out. At what time, we're not sure. But thanks for the time and thanks for the call, Holly.
Yeah, you take care.
You too. Bye-bye. All right, let's take a break. We'll go back to the FFAW. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 1. Peter, you're on the air.
Hello?
Hi there.
Hello, Paddy?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Peter Leonard here.
Right on.
And just want to make a couple of comments there this morning about this tie-up right now. And, there's a lot of this, I suppose, the problem of today, but there's a lot of it from the problem of the past, too. And, there's good men and women that wants to go fishing, and they wants this solved and get back on the water to their job in the plant or whatever the case may be, and, get this over with. And, excuse me, a lot of people don't see any progress being made because we're not hearing a lot from union or whatever. We hear a little bit on the television show, a bit of comedy on the Jason Sullivan show, and we're not hearing much in concrete news or other than that than social media. And all that, you can take it with a grain of salt. But a lot of it lies with the problem of the union there herself, in my opinion. And It's hard for the FFAW to take on government in the way that the membership would like to take it on and try to get this resolved.
What does that mean? Take them on like a what?
Well, take them on really publicly and tell the truth and come out, guns a-blazing or whatever the case may be, and try to get this resolved. Because, the fact of the matter is, it's like back in the days, not too long ago, Darren King was fishery minister, and the union and Earl McCurdy and all them, put up a strong fight against the provincial government, and they pulled their funding. You go down there this morning, Paddy, there's around 40, 50 cars in the parking lot, all the employees, some on the sunshine list, some pretty close to it. You go down there, there's a science branch, and they're doing science work for federal, provincial government. And all this is being paid and funded by the same people that they're supposed to be taking on for a fight. And that's just not possible, because they'll do the same thing as Darren King done. And, there's more employees in that building down there than almost, it's not on par with the Confederation building, but I'll say it's on par with the fishery building. And, who's paying for all this and who's getting it all done? If I was accused of doing something wrong, apparently in the media or social media now, that the Premier said that they wanted this regulation changed at the last minute, I'd be out guns a-blazing, protecting my innocence. And I don't know, Paddy, but it's so frustrating, and here it is again, and there's nothing moving that we know about anyway, and I don't know how it's going to get it to move. And that's if I was Greg Priddy, I'd be asking for Darren Lovelace's resignation if he wasn't doing the work that he was put there to do, because those people, really, I think it's agriculture that they're appointed there for, not for the fishery of Newfoundland and Labrador. But, having said that this morning, we need somebody that's going to put it back to a fishery union. And, whether that'll be, in my opinion, whether that'll be Ryan Cleary, Robert Keane, Derek Butler, someone like that, and turn this back to a fisheries union again.
Derek Butler, the former head of the ASP?
Yes, sir. I'm going to tell you, he understands it, and he's one of the better ones. And there's nothing you could teach about him that what needs to be done, in my opinion, with this union and this fishery. Someone got to take it. Either the Premier got to take it seriously and try to get this resolved. And there's actually so much put out there by Ryan Cleary, panel is not working, all that kind of stuff. And apparently, you can't say that Ryan Cleary is wrong, because it isn't working. If it was working, it wouldn't be what it was last year, and it wouldn't be what again this year. If you look at the fishery in Newfoundland and Labrador, that's the inshore fishery. I'm not talking about offshore factory freezers, but that is a part of the fishery. But, let's face it, the last 10 years you look at that, from a fisherman's point of view, I don't know what it's going to look like in 10 years' time, if there is going to be a 10 years' time. It's fallen by the wayside more and more each year. And all I ask government this morning is this. Please, think about the people that elected you to serve. To get this straightened up, because I don't think that the FFAW is capable of doing it. So, it really lies with the government of the day. And frustrated this morning, Paddy. Job to think, but I'd like to hear some news. Every minute, fish harvesters are waiting for some kind of announcement or some kind of a way to move forward, and we're hearing absolutely nothing. And only for your show, that's the most concrete news that comes out. Anyway, Paddy, thanks for the call.
I appreciate your time, Peter. Take care.
Good.
Yeah, and Peter says he's frustrated. Yeah, well, you know why? Because the fishery is frustrating. And I'm not implying that I don't want to talk about the fishery because it's frustrating. We have to talk about it. There's a lot of confusion about who asked for a change in the collective bargaining and a change in the price setting. So people are telling me, well, the FFAW asked for a change. But I'm not so sure that makes a whole lot of sense, given the fact that their price was very likely, if you're a betting man, not going to be the one selected. So, it's unbelievable to me. After 6 weeks of tie-ups last year, there wasn't enough time for all sides, that includes the government, the processors and the harvesters, the union, ASP and the provincial government, whether it be the Premier, Minister Lovelace or whoever, to come up with an agreed upon change to the formula, as opposed to pick one or the other. Anyway, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the minimum wage. And Tom's in the queue to talk about a call we had earlier from Trevor about housing for the Canadian Forces. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 3. Tom, you're on the air.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
Very well this morning. Thank you. How about you?
Not so bad. Paddy, I was listening earlier to a gentleman who called in, and he was talking about housing issues in the military and people living in their cars and all those kind of things. And, he painted a picture of a military that I'm not familiar with. And as you probably know, I'm a retired military officer. I was a finance officer. I spent a career dealing with all of those types of issues. And although I will agree, the treatment of veterans and a lot of the other things that are happening in the military today, sometimes appall me, especially the sexual abuse things and all of those kind of things. The facts that the gentleman was presenting were a little skewed. Now, I don't know anything about people in the military living in their cars or anything like that. I'm in contact with a lot of people, a lot of places across Canada, and I've never heard of it, and I can't imagine for a moment that if I were still in the military and one of my people were in a condition such as living in a vehicle or something like that, I would have it fixed immediately. But for the purposes of understanding things, a private who joins the military tomorrow gets $3,600 a month. That's the basic pay, $3,600 a month. For the first few months of their career, they're living in quarters in military housing where their room and board and all those things are provided and deducted, so they're living well. Similarly, an officer cadet receives $1,000 less, but they're living under the same conditions. And then 3 years later, that same private is making $6,000 a month. Now, starting last year in July, the military came up with this thing called the Housing Differential Allowance. And for every city, basically, in Canada, they came up with housing rates, what the average rate is there. And they also said, and came up with a policy that nobody would be paying more than 25% of their pay towards housing. So, and if they found they were in circumstances where they had to pay more than what had been determined was the average rental rates there, then they would get this additional money included to their pay. And that's what's happening. So I'm at a loss to understand why people are living in their vehicles and things when this thing has been changed, and people are being treated fairly and getting the differential of the rents.
Some of that might be attributable to the fact that, let's say, for instance, someone has left the military. I'm not sure what the right word is here. Scarred. And maybe post-traumatic syndrome, or whatever the case may be, or living with an injury suffered as a member of the military. And consequently, 25% of nothing or 25% of social assistance might be the circumstance where people find themselves unable to afford rent. Because if you're on social assistance, even a 25% offset really does put you up against it, depending on where you live in the country. Average rent has soared right across the country, including this province, notably the metro region. So I guess that might be some of the circumstances. The problem for me is, I guess it's twofold. For active members of the military, we've seen it well documented about the military preparedness, and it's woeful. I mean, it really truly is. And then you talk about the equipment and armament and the fact that they're sometimes having to scramble through their own accord. And then secondly, upon retirement, I hear endless stories of what they refer to as paperwork warfare, trying to get the supports required. Then the conversations that have been had with members who come in looking for help, and they're told, well, here's a solution, medical assistance in dying. So I think the problem is distinctly twofold. For the active members, preparedness is a problem. If we had to mobilize today, we're 58% prepared, and for some arms of the armed forces, they're even worse than that. We're short 15,500 troops if we're talking about full capacity. So there's continues to be lots of problems. As much as we have seen some work done for, you mentioned the housing differential, that's important, but it might not be a catch-all for members who simply, between whether it be possibly social assistance and a 25% offset, still leaves them in a really bad spot.
Yeah, all those issues, I totally agree with you. The issue I'm addressing here is for active duty members, people who are actually serving in the military now, and what their housing allowances and benefits are. I totally agree with you. I retired 20 years ago. 30 years ago, I think I retired from the military. Our pay is based on the 2% per year that we get of our average salary times, I did 23 years of service, so I got 46% of my pay average over 6 years. Problem being, the Prime Minister of the day decided to freeze all our wages for a few years, so we got screwed. All of that notwithstanding, I agree that the issues regarding to people who have been medically discharged and all of those type of things, it's a completely different kettle of worms. But for people serving in the military now, the young man or the family posted to St. John's, Newfoundland, for example, there are benefits available for them. If they find themselves in a situation where they're paying more than what they've determined to be the rent for this city, then they get an allowance from the Canadian Forces to help them with that. And they shouldn't have to pay any more than 25% of what their pay is. So, and of course, the more money you make, of course, the less you get, and in certain circumstances, depending on your pay, you won't get any of this. So I think they're treating people fairly that are in the military with respect to the housing part. Now, all the other things you say, I was in the military at one time, went on an exercise, and we didn't have enough money to pay for bullets, and we actually had to say bang. And that's the honest-to-God truth. So I understand the readiness thing and all those kind of things. But with respect to the housing part, I think that's being addressed, and people are being treated reasonably fairly on housing.
Yeah, and then I hear from veterans. I'm part of this private message on Facebook group when they really dig into a lot of things. They talk about the Income Replacement Benefit, the Pension Act, and some of the Veterans Wellbeing Act and the shortcomings therein, and the prohibition of clawbacks, which apparently continue to happen. So there's lots of complexities inside this conversation regarding the Canadian Armed Forces. Tom, would you like to say anything else, sir?
Yeah, the only final thing I would like to add something, which is that, I spent a lifetime contributing to the Canada Pension Plan. I spent 23 years contributing in the military, and I spent another 20 years contributing as a civilian. And one of my big beeps, and I'm sure other people in the military agree with, is that my military pension, small as it is reduced by the amount of Canada pension I receive. How that was possibly or ever justified, I don't know. I paid for the bloody thing. It's an insurance program that I paid for, and the government of Canada contributes nothing to it. Your job now, where you have a VOCM, and you pay for your Canada pension, and yet the government makes all the rules, and then members of the military, such as me, and there are other people such as different vocations getting pensions, where our pensions are reduced by the amount of Canada pension we get, and that's certainly not helping veterans, especially veterans such as myself who've been retired for 30 years. That's my final word, and thank you for listening.
I appreciate the call, Tom. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. Okay, let's go ahead and take a break. The city is bemoaning the demise and the loss of the Newfoundland Growlers. Lots of back and forth between the city and Deacon Sports and Entertainment. And, of course, we now have heard, based on a court ruling, about the hundreds of thousands of dollars out the door from St. John's Sports and Entertainment to Deacon Sports regarding their eviction back there a couple of years ago. Lots to talk about right after this. Don't go away. Welcome back to the program. Let's go to line number 1. Say good morning to Dean McDonald. Dean, you're on the air.
Morning, Patty, and as always, thank you very much for letting me come on.
Happy to have you on. So, is Deacon Sports no more?
Well, it exists, but it is no more, I guess, given recent loss of the Growlers and the impending sale of the team in Trois-Rivières. And it's really why I wanted to come on today, because I heard Councillor Ellsworth a few days ago, I guess late last week, and I was kind of scratching my head wondering how the hell he could come up with his numbers, because they make no sense. And I really feel that as chair of the Finance Committee and on the board of St. John's Sports and Entertainment, he had a fiduciary to tell people the truth, and that didn't happen. He came out and he basically said, look, don't see what the big deal is. We're only losing out the same as a couple of concert nights a year. We get $75,000 for these guys. So that math is just not true. He would know the difference. The reality is they have a profit guarantee of a minimum of 75. We had passed that in March. Probably if we had played the last 6 games in playoffs, it's closer to 100. The city receives $350,000 of our sponsorship revenue, which, by the way, is about 100 more than they used to get from the Caps. The naming rights, which we bought the proponent to the table, and is conditional on hockey, is $150 a year. They probably make 40 or 50K on parking and whatever they make margin. So, the benefit to the city is, north of 600, 650, 700, somewhere in that order of magnitude, not counting all the spin-off. When Ron says it's, a couple of concerts, well, a couple of concerts is 10,000 people. The full season of hockey is, closer to 150,000 people. Just the teams and officials alone represent 750 hotel nights a year. We have Growlers Gibbs, we have the Growlers Academy, we have the job. So to dismiss it as like it's not that big a hole to fill is insulting, to say the least, factually incorrect. And, Ron forgets to mention that the only reason we invested in the team and brought it here was because the Leafs wanted to bring a team here, and we went to the city and said, hey, we'll invest the millions of dollars required to bring a team here, providing there was a condition, providing we could manage the facility, which, by the way, we said we'll bring in way more concerts based on our relationship with Live Nation and others, and in addition to that, we'll reduce the subsidy. At the end of the first season, they reneged on that agreement. So, had they just said, look, we're not prepared to do that, we wouldn't have made the investment. And, I went to see these guys, the St. John's Sports and Entertainment Board, I think it was 2 summers ago, and said, hey, guys, look, you make money off us. You make a lot of money off us. You do quite well. We're losing money every season because we didn't plan to be here on just a lease basis only. How can we fix this? It's. Do you think this is going to go on forever? Nothing. Crickets. And so for Ron to dismiss it is unbelievable to me. That's just absolutely, totally misleading. We poured our hearts and souls in this. We poured millions of dollars into it, and we never had the support of the city. And it's clear that they didn't think we were important. Ron says it's just 2 concerts. Are you kidding me?
So the back and forth has been really quite clear. But the assertion coming from yourself and Deacon Sports is that if you were given the ability to manage the facility, then you may have had a different set of financial circumstances. Mr. Ellsworth points to the fact that you were given that latitude in Trois-Rivières, but they were out somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 million. So if you had that luxury in Trois-Rivières and could make it work, what leads you to believe you can make it work here?
Great point. First off, we don't have the luxury in Trois-Rivières. We don't manage the building. Ron just happens to have his backs wrong, which seems to be a consistent point here.
So what was the relationship with Trois-Rivières?
We had a team there. We had a marketing arrangement there where we could bring in acts, etc. The amount outstanding related to the lease, related to the city putting in a whole bunch of equipment for concerts and et cetera, which they hadn't fulfilled. And we have a great relationship with those folks out there. We were sorting that out because they knew we had buyers coming in, and they were quite happy with that. We were saying, look, we're not staying here, as I've stated very clearly that 2 years ago I decided to get out of the business for non-related business reasons, and we were pursuing that and felt pretty good about the process, to be quite honest with you. So, Mr. Ellsworth is wrong on that assertion. And secondly, he forgets the fact that, A, they made a promise to us that we could take over the facility in St. John's, which is that's the model that works, by the way, in most jurisdictions, because you're sharing front office staff, and the economics are way better. So that's a really important point that gets lost in all this, and everyone forgets that they threw us out of the stadium, by the way, illegally. A couple of years ago. How do you think it was for us going out and trying to get sponsors under that cloud? Well, guess what? We lost hundreds of thousands of dollars of sponsors. We played in front of 1,000 people for 6 games and lost fans over it. If anyone thinks that was easy to recover from, I mean, the city kind of goes, well, tough luck. That's just a bump on the road. It wasn't a bump on the road. It was a fatal stab to the heart for the team to try and recover from that. We were still recovering from that. If anyone thinks that it's easy, and the city is no big deal. And by the way, a lot of taxpayers' money lost on that little episode.
Hundreds of thousands. So when you brought in a partner here locally, what was your equity stake in the team? What percentage of the team did you own?
100%.
You own it 100%. Did you own 100% of the Trois-Rivières Lyon?
Yes, yeah.
So the Trois-Rivières media covers it a bit differently than it's been done around here. And they talk about the fact that there was some leaked commentary from January meetings where the assertion was, so said some members of the Trois-Rivières media, is that the league wanted Deacon Sports gone. So how were you able to sell Trois-Rivières? What was a different set of circumstances there versus the Newfoundland Growlers? Because there was an outstanding debt regarding the team in Trois-Rivières. So do you think that's accurate reporting where they say the league itself wanted Deacon Sports out?
Yeah, I think it is, and I'll tell you why. First off, we had a very good deal to sell the teams. We were very happy with it, with both teams. We had 3 teams we sold Iowa, of course, over a year ago, so we were pleased with that exercise. And we had a really good buyer in Steve Lill, the Fix Auto owner, 2,200 franchise all over the world, to buy both teams, and really excited to buy both teams. But the league imposed a deadline of April 2nd. He stated very clearly what his issues were, which was that he needed permission from his working partner, which is the Caisse de Dépôt, Quebec, which would not give him permission to buy the teams. And he was in the process of buying them out, and that was the long, arduous process. We thought the teams were going to be sold. We did a press release on it back in October. So we thought it was going to be done before Christmas, and then it dragged on. And, he's in some kind of legal battle with the case to buy them out. And then once he's clear of that, he could buy it. And as recently as a week ago, he said, look, I still want to buy these teams, and I still want to put money into the communities, et cetera, et cetera. So a great partner, a great buyer. So we were pretty comfortable with that. One of the things that happened with us and the league is last year we went to the league because we had to pay a travel subsidy for teams to come to Newfoundland. Fair enough. Unless, once we got into the information and looked at the schedule, if teams travel more than 700 miles, they fly. And what we found out was that Newfoundland represented only 10% of all those games in the league. So we went, why is Newfoundland paying a subsidy to teams when, so if Florida, here's a great example in the playoffs last year, Florida played in St. John's, and we had to provide a subsidy, and then they played in Utah. They're within 100 miles of the same distance, right? Utah to Fort Myers, and Fort Myers and Newfoundland are virtually identical. No subsidy for playing in Utah. Subsidy for us. So we went to the league and said, look, guys, this isn't fair. This is punitive, and you're not being consistent. They voted against getting rid of the thing, and we really made a big deal of it. We said, no, guys, you got to treat your partners in this fairly. And eventually, after a lot of consternation, we won that. When we got to the meetings this year, and Lil wasn't ready to close, although he's saying, look, I'm going to close. We don't have a lease in place, even though, in fairness to Brent Mead, who worked really hard on this and has been great to deal with, said, look, don't worry, who's ever the owner, we're trying to work out a lease, we're out of compliance. And guess what? There's there's 27 teams around that table go, I don't want to spend 30 to 40 grand every time I got to go to Newfoundland. So guess what? Really easy decision. I think it's, governance issue of letting teams who are fighting for a playoff spot against us vote on that. So, that's another matter we got to take up. But I want to be really clear is that the issue was that they, I know that the league even talked about whether they should have Canadian teams in that. Flying to Newfoundland was not everyone's favorite piece of business. Flying to Newfoundland when they don't get a subsidy, that was fatal.
So beyond that, and of course everyone wants what they want when they want it inside that room of the Board of Governors, but the assertion also from the Trois-Rivières media is that beyond that fractured relationship regarding travel subsidy was also whether or not Deacon Sports were paying their bills. And they say that goes back not just this season, but the course of 3 seasons. So when they report it like that, whether it be in Trois-Rivières and or in Newfoundland, were the bills being paid on time? Because that's how they're reporting in Trois-Rivières, a very different set of circumstances than how it's been viewed in this province.
Yeah, so really the growlers weren't an issue, and we were fighting with the city up there over whether they were going to honor the commitment. The contract in Trois-Rivières said that it was absolutely the language in the contract said that we understand it's vital that we put in this capital expenditure so you can host concerts as it's critical to the success of your business. So this wasn't like just kind of us having a hissy fit. This was a fundamental part of the business. We also, which is people would understand, is in Canada when the Omicron hit, we played in front of either no fans or limited fans in both cities. Whereas in the U.S., they were full blast. They were going full blast. And we said to the league, look, guys, we'll fly down to Utah to play a game, but we've got no revenue coming in here. So, you have to make accommodation, which they did, quite frankly. They understood that because they've all been there. It's not a big business, minor hockey. And I think they were really pleased that, they knew I was getting out of the business and we had a really good buyer and there was no issue. In fact, when we went to the league meeting, I guess it's a week ago today, actually, as I think about it, we said, look, the buyer's not going to be here. We'll straighten up any financial issues. So they rejected it because that was not the issue for them. The issue was we don't want to go out in the middle of the North Atlantic to play games. And I don't think it's any more complicated than that. And I wouldn't confuse that with the matter of dealing with Mr. Ellsworth's comments, which is, the city did quite well off us. And we'll see how that goes for them.
Just so I understand. So when you went and complained about the travel subsidy and consequently the board voted against it and you say that you eventually won, so does that mean that the subsidy was going to be removed? And what does that have to do with the fact that Sorry?
It was removed this season, Patty. We did not pay for any teams flying to Newfoundland this season. And in fairness to the league, they tried to work it out that no particular team had to travel to Newfoundland more than once a season, et cetera, because it is expensive. But listen, if you're Florida and you're going to Utah, it's the same expense.
Although wouldn't it be a different expense, though, Dean? Because everyone who's ever traveled inside the confines of the United States, it's different expense to fly from Fort Myers to St. John's versus fly from Fort Myers to Salt Lake, because you could be on Southwest Airlines paying $99 a head. So are the costs actually analogous?
Well, they are, Patty, depending on when. So if you're flying in here, and by the way, the other part of it was we had to pay 100% of all the expenses of any teams flying in here during the playoffs. So, so that was very, very punitive. It wasn't even the normal subsidy of $500 or $600 US a player. So I tell you why it's comparable. So when you do the analysis, it's all dependent on time because that's the way travel works. And I was listening to the gentleman this morning who missed the Habs game, like horrible. But so if you want to fly into Newfoundland during our Easter break, guess what? It's expensive. If you want to fly from Florida to Utah on Thanksgiving break, it's really expensive. And guess what? There's a lot of games that happen in November in our league. So it's just a timing issue. So comparatively speaking, there's no real difference, and actually, one of the things that was great about having the Trois-Rivières team is teams would fly to Trois-Rivières to play, and then they come to Newfoundland. So So, they could bus, everyone in our division can bus to Trois-Rivières. Busing, if you're Maine, busing the Trois-Rivières is the same distance as busing to Reading. Like, it's no big difference. So really, once that team got in the league, that reduced everybody's costs. So there was a lot of things working. But, when you force a league on principle, I guess we said, look, here's the data. You're treating us unfairly. I don't think they were very happy with that. And the league's not as sophisticated as the NHL or others in the sense that who would shut down the season with 6 games ago? Just finish the season and sort it out, right? That was kind of, especially when you have an offer on the table that, listen, this is no big deal, we're going to take care of it. So I think we were really blindsided. We didn't know. I had a call from the Leafs, I think the night before the meeting, say, look, these guys think they got an opportunity here to get rid of the travel to Newfoundland. That's the issue. So, and I think that was the issue.
In summary, when they say the league wanted Deakin Sports out, so are you saying that if it's not Deakin Sports as an entity, it's the location geographically speaking? So no matter who comes forward, regardless if it's Lille or Fixed Auto, and that guy's trying to get in major or junior, looks like he's trying to plant the seeds for maybe crack at a piece of an NHL team or something. So you're saying regardless of
very open about that.
Yeah, regardless of who comes forward, there will not be an ECHL team here because of geography, not because of Deakin Sports.
Oh, I agree. I mean, 100%. In fact, it was almost comical when Ellsworth said, well, we got a great relationship with the ECHL. It's not a problem. Like, the ECHL will not be coming back to Newfoundland. Not a chance. Like, it's just not going to happen. And by the way, the ECHL, which I said last week, which I think people lose sight of, is we came into the league and we got approved because we were going to manage the facility. That's great. That got pulled from us in the summer after the championship. Then we didn't have a lease in place. Then we had COVID. Then we got kicked out of the arena. I think out of the 5 seasons we were in the league, we might have been in compliance for schedule once. And why is that important? It's important for 2 reasons. One is the league wants to get its schedule out early. It's usually this time of year, which is probably why the April 2nd date was the date. It's usually around this time of year because guess what? All the teams in the league start selling their season ticket holders for the next year, start selling their sponsors. It's a whole cycle, right? It's a business. So at the end of the season, that's what you're doing. So they want the schedule out. So people are pissed off that the schedule isn't out. With us, every year, the schedule was delayed. And by the way, it wasn't helpful for us either because when we came into the league and we talked to local sponsors, we said, look, there's going to be more concerts. There's going to be more things happening. We could get people on board. Suddenly you're going out trying to sell and saying, well, we don't have a lease in place, but will you sponsor us? Like, that's pretty tough business, Patty. As you can appreciate. Then you get kicked out on basically on a charge that was turned around. Like if Ellsworth thinks that the city had no part in this, it's absolute folly, especially when he comes out and he has all his numbers wrong. So you go like, my God, talk to the lads across the street from the arena at the embassy. We kept them alive. And Ellsworth comes out and says, well, I'm really, the losers and all this are the businesses and all that. Well, where were you when we were at the table with you saying, look, we're not going to be here. You understand that this doesn't work. We can't lose every year. You make money every year. That is not a model that works. So, guys, how do you want to handle it? They didn't want to handle it. Well, I think the outcome for them is something they're happy about.
Well, we'll see if we can get Councillor Ellsworth on to speak to the numbers you put forward. And I appreciate your time this morning, Dean. It's a shame that the Growler's gone by the wayside, but it simply doesn't look like there's a business model available under the current structure for pro and or major junior in this province, which is a crying shame. And just a very last comment. Back when the Fog Devils were here, it would have been an excellent opportunity for Memorial University to introduce a team. We could have had, guys playing 6-7 years down at the Mary Brown Centre in a row and maybe establish a new fan base at Mon with the students and bussing them down. I mean, there was so many lost opportunities along the way here. I'm off to the break, Dean, but I appreciate the time.
Yeah, lots of talent in this province could have played. So,
thanks for this.
right?
Absolutely. I appreciate your time. I'm a bit late for the break, Dean.
Okay.
Take
Cheers.
care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Let's take a break. Don't go away. Welcome back to the program. Let's go to line number 2. Say good morning to Ward 4 councillor here in town. That's Tom Davis. Tom, you're on the air.
Good morning, Patty.
Morning to you.
A lot to chew on there.
Yeah, I'd say. No question.
Yeah, as someone who's been thrown into a mid-term council and obviously gets briefed on everything to a certain degree, although St. John Sports Entertainment is a little bit hands. There's a separation between the two. I'm just going to make this comment, and this is not to any way, shape, or form to deride any staff or my fellow councillors, but I do have concerns with the I guess the culture difference and the partnership, and I do have a challenge with being so dismissive of a partner that was on a whole bunch of levels contributing to our city and our province. And, I'll leave it there because I don't really know very much about the intricate details of it all, but I do, as someone who can imagine being in the same situation with like one smack after another and dealing with a culture that is the antithesis or the total opposite as to the culture of a promotion-based business. I can only imagine the frustration that they felt. And my thoughts are with Dean and his team and all the employees and all the businesses and all the fans of the Growlers and the possibilities that could have been, that aren't.
Yeah, there's a lot to that. So, for instance, not to talk about the current makeup of the board, because I think they've brought in some new faces that I, fingers crossed, and I'm optimistic are going to be successful. But when you look at an entity that really needed one thing and one thing only inside the former Mile 1 Mary Brown Centre, now can't include the Convention Centre because that's its own thing that has partners like, Hospitality Newfoundland Labrador and Downtown St. John's, those types of things. But inside Mile 1 Mary Brown Centre, it was event nights. That was always going to be the key. The best event night security comes in the form of an anchor tenant. So, and Dave Williams just said this to me during the break, and I think he's absolutely right, and I've said it many times in the past. When the city lost out to Durham Dobbin to bring the major junior team to town, they never really subconsciously got over it. Consequently, there was back and forth and rackets about the cost of rent and the staff and everything that was related to any sort of contractual obligations on either side. They never got past it, and consequently, nobody from Durham Dobbin on has had an appropriate, meaningful working relationship with St. John Sports and Entertainment. For what reason, I have no idea. I do think some of it has just lingered since the Dobbin affair. But anyway, I'll let you get on to what you called to talk about, Tom.
Thank you. I want to touch on the minimum wage increase that just happened and the incredible, I guess, mindset that's in the city. In the province. So I have an excellent employee who's 17 years old and working with me now for a year and a bit. And I was paying him more than minimum wage. And I got a text from him saying he figures he's worth $17.50 an hour now, which would be like $1.90. It's just like a total disconnect. And I have to meet with him and try and explain to him the realities of business. In the last 6 months, the province has forced me to give raises. Some I would have given, like, for example, he was making more, and a lot of my staff do, but of over 7.6% is how much minimum wage has gone up since last October, including last October. And of course, insurance across the country is up around 7.6%. The cost of energy, fuel, electricity is all increasing. Rent, of course, within the city, property, business, realty taxes have gone up significantly. And it's this environment that I went down to listen to Wade Locks and Doug May's presentation about where we've come from and where we're going when it comes to our spending, our debt, deficits, revenues. And it was a great room. It's kind of like the greatest hits of people who call in, from veteran oil people to sage economists, the new chief economic officer or whatever title. So it was a great room full of gray-haired, wise people. There was no politicians there, unfortunately, I guess, other than me. But the context, which is important, is we just had a new budget, and the budget is we're going to be spending $10.3 billion, which is up 7.7%. We're going to be borrowing $2.4 billion, which is up 8.3%.
I thought it was borrowing at 2.8 and net borrow 1.6. Isn't that the number? I could be wrong.
Yeah, I don't know. You may be right. It depends how you look at it. I've got some notes here, so maybe I'm off. I've been saying 2.8, but for some reason on the numbers I was looking at today, I saw 2.4. But to put that in perspective, if you add up personal income tax and corporate income tax, it is less. That's less than what we're borrowing. So like if everybody doubled how much they paid the province in taxes, every business, every individual who pays provincial tax, doubled it, it still wouldn't make up for what we're borrowing. And how do we figure out a way, but our actual cash we receive, out of the $10.3 billion we're spending, we only get revenue of $7.6 billion. Sorry, $7.9 billion. And that's with Hebron hitting higher royalties. If you go down to the numbers, you'll see that we're getting almost $1.5 billion in oil royalties this year. And that's because Hebron's hitting its big payout. And to remind everybody, Hebron is not clean oil, it's dirty oil, heavy oil. And it's over 50% of what we're producing.
But I think some of the offset last year in oil was, of course, with Terra Nova. So we had a down year production-wise. The year before was about $1.1 billion in oil revenues. There was a bit of a laggard issue in that industry. I've been shagging up the brakes repeatedly here this morning, Tom, so I'll give you the final thoughts because they're flagging me off.
Okay. No worries. You had some good calls. Anyway, the moral story is we have the highest revenue per capita in the country. We have the highest expenses per capita in the country, and we have the highest debt per capita in the country. We run this province like a 21-year-old roughneck who goes to Alberta and makes a fortune, and then he's got to turn around and fly back because he's got no money left. He's got to borrow money to get a cab to the airport. And that's how we run this province. And every politician from every stripe, because it isn't just Liberals or Conservatives or NDP, needs to figure out something other than throw money at the problem because it's not working. Everyone have a great day.
You too, Tom. Thank you. Bye-bye. All right, let's go ahead and take a break. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 3. Sandy, you're on the air.
Good morning, Patty. How are you doing this morning?
Very well. How about you?
Good. I'm here with Marianne Oakley. We're both with the Vera Plynn Charitable Foundation, and we'd like to have a little chat this morning, and hopefully your viewers, and listeners will give us a support with purchasing a ticket. We have an online draw called the Spring Days Lottery. Patty?
Tell us about it.
Okay, well, it's over $41,000 in prizes and gift cards. Tickets are only $20 each. All proceeds benefit the individuals living with intellectual disabilities in our communities. Or a cash option of $25,000. Viewers and listeners can go online at www.veraplynsociety.ca. If you're having any trouble with getting a ticket, you can always give us a call here at the office at 709-739-6017. Do we have a few seconds here to give a shout out to our sponsors, Patty?
Absolutely. But before we get into that, so, people hear some of these organizations like the Vera Plynn have some base idea what you might be involved with and who you're supporting and helping. So just break down, is there anything specifically earmarked for the monies coming from this particular contest, or raffle, pardon me?
So hi Patty, this is Marianne.
Hi Marianne.
Hi. So we have our Vera Plynn Society and we have our Vera Plynn Charitable Foundation. So the foundation's mandate is to provide funds to offset the programs of the society. So specifically, these funds would be for the operations of our Perlin Centre, which is our day program on the corner of Pennywell and Rope Walk Lane. So in that facility, we have approximately 100 people attend every day and do different programming based on their abilities, their likes, and interests. So that facility is the facility that does require a little more support than our other programs.
I mean, I've seen the good work that's been done. I know people who have been involved with the Vera Plynn Society and their families, and without it, it would be a huge gap that I don't know if government could ever step in and fill, which I think can be said for many volunteer organizations and or charitable foundations, because, you back out volunteers and people like the horsepower behind Vera Plynn, and we've got ourselves a problem.
We do, and I tell you, we're unique because where we offer services to individuals after they exit from the school system. So depending on what an individual wants to do or they can do, our program is specific to the person. So if somebody wants an employment program, we have employment services, depending if they want supportive employment, independent employment, or we have our own button shop where they come under our umbrella, and it's an employment generation program. It's a social enterprise program. But if somebody just wants to come and attend, for whatever reason, a recreation program, we can offer that. And then we can have like life skills programs. We try and offer whatever the individual wants to do. And the government, they're great support. They're partnered with us in a number of programs. But the biggest challenge we have as an organization is serving those who currently got no services. So our unserved population is always a challenge, because if you're already in receipt of services, great. But we're always pushing our envelope so that we always strive to serve more people. So no matter what funding we receive, we push it further and we try and do more programs, new initiatives, different pilot programs with these funds that are not earmarked specifically now, but we can introduce new programming and therefore introduce new clients to our programs.
Just for a couple of specific programs that I've always been curious about is, I'm not 100% sure what this program is called, but it's basically the matchmaking between potential employers and employees coming from the Vera Flynn Society. So how does that work and how successful has it been?
Okay, so that would be our job coach or our supportive employment program. So that program is in partnership with the Immigration, Population Growth and Skills Department of the province, and that is a great program because sometimes somebody do need hand-over-hand support to make themselves successful in their employment, and sometimes they just need a buddy system when they're at their place of employment just to ensure that they get their day's work done. So it's great. So the employer not only gets our client as an employee, but they also get the support of a second person to ensure that the client themselves are successful in their employment. And like I said, depending on the work environment or depending on the level of support an individual requires, then we would look at some different types of purchase supports where we would purchase support, internal support from a staff person already employed by that employer who is just there to assist the person with the intellectual disability. So it's a great program. So the employer benefits, our client benefits, and then the support worker also would benefit from their position. And
something I have a familiar background with is the button shop.
Okay. Yes. So our button shop is our own social enterprise. So it's what we do in the button shop. Obviously, we make promotional buttons and magnets, and we've spread out recently. We're doing hats and T-shirts and dresses, and we do some office overload. So that program is when an individual wants to be employed, but not necessarily in the community environment. So for whatever reason, if they're not comfortable working in off our umbrella, say outside of the Vera Flynn Society, or sometimes an individual is just more comfortable with a group of their peers, or even if they don't want to work beyond their exemption, so they'd be limited to what employment is available. So we started the button shop, I think it was in 2000 now that we actually branched out and had the facility there on Pennywell. And since that time, hundreds of individuals have gone through the program. And specifically, if you're good at making buttons, well, we'll call you when we get a button contract. If you're good at doing T-shirts, and if you only want to do T-shirts, well, we'll call you when we get that kind of employment. So, yeah, it benefits everybody. And what I find with our button shop as well is we have a lot of individuals who work at the button shop who live independently in the community. So it's a great facility for someone to come, feel comfortable, and have a chat with us, and then we can help in other areas of their lives. So if it is employment, great, but if it's, if they're comfortable and we have a chat with an individual, well, then we can assist them if it's with housing, if it's with, budgeting, a medical appointment. So that's almost a connection, too, that we really enjoy having with our clients, and then they feel comfortable to come into us, and we can help them with, anything that they need assistance with.
And, of course, you can always get the Vera Perlin Band. Marianne, before we run out of time here, let's very quickly go down to the sponsors you want to thank, because I'm a bit late for the news, but, the Spring Days Lottery ongoing now. Go to VeraPerlinSociety.ca. It's $20 a ticket. Who do you want to thank?
We want to take Island Furniture, who was in partnership with us for many, many years, Patty. They came on board with a $30,000 gift card. We got a new Erin snowblower from Atlantic Trailer and Tractor. Terranova came on board with an RV gift certificate for a fully serviced RV site. Eastern Saudi, Marie's Mini Mart, Milwaukee Tools, Mark's Work Warehouse, Molson Coors, Smith's Home Hardware, Weber Charcoal Barbecue, Canadian Tire gift card, our DM Industrial gift card, Pizza, The Woodshed, and Bercy's Manufacturing. Big shout out to our sponsors and to your listeners. Come on board and support us with a $20 ticket. Every ticket sold today and until May the 5th is huge support to our funding here, Patty.
And draw date is the 17th of May. I appreciate the time, ladies. Thanks for the call.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, one of my friends and one of the longest-serving volunteers at VOWR is Ron LeDrew. He's next. Don't go away.
You're listening to a rebroadcast of VOCM Open Line. Have your say by calling 709-273-5211 or 1-888-590-8626 and listen live weekday mornings at 9 a.m.
Welcome back to the program. Let's go to line number one. Say good morning to our friend Ron LeDrew. Ron, you're on the air.
Good morning, Patty. Thank you for taking my call.
Happy to do it, sir.
Not too bad. As we move towards our 100th anniversary here at VOWR, we're celebrating with a big concert at Holy Heart Theatre here in St. John's. It's going to be on Saturday, June 1st. Now, the anniversary event is going to feature some of the finest performers in our province. Sheila Williams is going to be hosting the night, and the singers will be supported by an all-star band that will include members of the legendary Wonderful Grand Band. Now, tickets are on sale today at noon at Holy Heart Theatre, the box office there, or online, holyhearttheatre.com. Of course, all the proceeds going towards helping the all-volunteer radio station VOWR continue for the next generation of listeners. So mark your calendars, June 1st, for this big event.
100th anniversary is absolutely incredible. The fact that it's remained on the air with all the volunteer horsepower and people like David Chafe and other members of the board is outstanding. And you mentioned two members of the Wonderful Grand Band. Of course, they'd be Paul Boomer Stamp and Sandy Morse. And also included in that band would be Glenn Parsons, Joe Tompkins, I'm pretty sure. And the musical director is someone who's a friend of mine as well and close to you. Of course, your son Chris is the musical director. So that's pretty cool stuff.
Well, we're looking forward to this big concert, and of course, there's a lot of activity in the city during the summer with the big concert for Shania Twain, and of course, that's an outdoor concert, but ours is indoors with nice, comfortable seats at Holy Heart Theatre, and we're looking for a big sellout. Hopefully, that'll come true, but anyway, it's going to be a great night. We got some great performers, and we're going to have maybe a guest performer drop by. We're not quite sure about that yet, but it's going to be a great night, and we're going to looking forward to it.
Ron, like many volunteer organizations, the quest is to bring in the next generation, the next bit of young blood. Now, I know Zach Snow is down at VOWR, for instance, and you've been there quite a long time yourself. How's it working? Are people showing some interest in being a volunteer and going on the air at VOWR?
Yes, as a matter of fact, in the past year or two, we have some new younger volunteers that have stepped up, and they're working out very well, and we're looking forward to maybe having some other younger volunteers as time goes on. As you know, we're all getting older, and our time may be up. We don't know when, but it's always nice to have volunteers standing by to take the lead and go into the next millennium.
I think it's terrific, and I'm going to rattle off some of the performers at the concert coming up on the 1st of June at Holy Heart Theatre, and of course includes Brothers in Stereo. That's Chris LeDrew, Andrew LeDrew, Barry LeDrew, and I believe Ron's probably going to play with them that night as well. Then you got Pamela Morgan. Figgy Duff, let's go. Pamela Morgan, Bob McDonald, the silky tones of Bob McDonald, Larry Foley from the Punters, Conor O'Brien, the Irish Descendants, Michelle Knoftel, absolutely terrific. Mick Davis, one of my favourites, veteran and one of the real leaders in the music industry in this province over the decades, Anita best. Kelsey Arsenault is going to be there. And I mentioned Brothers in Stereo. John Curran, the front man for the Masterless Men. Jenny Gear, terrific, of course. She's had a long-running relationship as a duo with Sandy Morris as well. Then you add in Kevin Evans and Darcy Broderick. Of course, Darcy, former member of the Irish Descendants as well. And then it's David Chafe and Annabeth Lovelace. So that's a terrific musical lineup.
And you know, the host is Sheila Williams. It doesn't get any better than that.
Sheila's cracked. I mean, whether it be with Spirit of Newfoundland or otherwise, and here's a fun story, Ron. I'm sitting here doing this show one morning, and I get a call that's really off the wall. I'm thinking, what is going on here? And it was Sheila Williams calling to spoof me, to prank me here live on the air. I think she came in with a full Southern Shore accent. Like, I didn't remember what the topic was, but eventually she sent me a picture. It was her and Kathy from Spirit of Newfoundland and Deborah Wells Smith were all there having the greatest kind of laugh at my expense.
Well, I'm sure we'll have a lot of laughs during that concert, I'm sure.
And there's also a 100th anniversary dinner opportunity coming up. I'll give some of the details out soon about that as well. Ron, keep up the good work. Always appreciate the time. Nice to hear from you.
Well, thank you, Patty, for your time, and good luck to all of your listeners.
Thank you, Ron. Stay in touch.
Bye now.
Right, bye-bye. 100 years of VOWR, absolutely brilliant. I have heard from some folks via email, and for the large part, these were either seniors or people emailing me on their behalf. So this is about the world that's changing very quickly, going from counter service that we've all been so accustomed to the world of digital relationships. Now, it can be very efficient and effective, if people aren't wary of, whether it be online banking or otherwise, or renewing your driver's license registration online versus trekking into Mount Pearl to go to motor vehicle. And this one is about Bell. Now, Bell, of course, one of the big three in the country, and they're going paperless with their billing. People were given a notice very recently that come this month, there'll be no longer paper bills sent out. It's all going to be done via email, which has brought upon some concerns for folks who, whether it be Bernice Morgan, famous author, Random Passage, has been mentioned in the news clip or the news story, is that she's got this worry. She doesn't want the internet. And boy, I wish I was Bernice, because I don't want the internet either. And the problem is, for folks, they might not have access. But just to calm the worried nerves out there, Bell does have a program available where you can continue to get your paper bill. So what they say is for folks who are 65 years of age or older, have a disability, or do not have internet or data services, you can make arrangements with your Bell customer service agent if you're lucky enough to actually get him on the telephone, and consequently you'll continue to get your paper billing. So I know when people saw the headline, they're going, oh no, I'm a Bell customer, I don't have email, I don't use the internet, or maybe I have a disability, or I don't have data services. No worries. You get in touch with Bell on your landline or however you're going to reach out to Bell. Speak to your customer service. Tell them that you fit one of those categories. You're 65 years of age or older, have a disability, or you do not have the internet. You'll be able to continue to get your paper billing. All right, today's a good day to get on the program. Lots going on, and we have indeed confirmed that today will be the day we hear from Minister Bernie Davis at Environment and Climate Change regarding next steps for World Energy GH2. Whether that's an approval, whether that's an approval that comes with conditions, we'll find out at some point today. Not entirely sure what time. It might have already happened. I'm busy on the air, but we're told that today is the day. If you're in the St. John's Metro region, the number to dial to get on the air is 709-273-5211. Elsewhere, it's toll-free long distance 1-888-590-VOCM, which is 8626. We're taking a break and then we're coming back. Welcome back to the show. So news that's developing here today. People have been clamoring for some ride sharing to come to the town or to come to the province. So when you travel, you either get Lyft or Uber and or potentially a traditional cab as we know it. But Uber has now been approved to operate in Newfoundland and Labrador. It's certainly going to mean a knock for the established traditional cab companies in the province. To what extent, we don't know. But now that Uber has been approved, they're going to try to get potential drivers to join their force. There's going to be a local launch in the coming weeks. So here they come. It's like everything else in this world. You got to know what you're getting yourself into, right? So there are plenty of Uber drivers who are disgruntled based on surge pricing. So when you get in a taxi cab, the price is established at the PUB about what the meter starts at. And I can't remember the real number, so I'm not going to give it out. But the cab starts at a certain sitting fee, and then of course the kilometre charge is well understood and documented by the PUB. If you're talking about Uber and ride sharing, you've got to be aware. Say, for instance, there's some sort of big event. And whether it be to go to the George Street Festival, or to go down to Iceberg Alley, or to go to the Churchill Park to see Shania Twain, or whatever else might be going on, if they know it's going to be a busy night or a busy segment of time, they have what's called surge pricing. So before you start to just, download the Uber app and use that and say the hell with the traditional cab companies, be aware that you might not always know what you're paying. Now, it'll come up when you try to order an Uber about what the forecasted cost is, and they can't take you on some sort of wild joyride as a visitor to one city or another. You don't know where you're going. You have no idea what the route is. So you have no idea of the price. But if you did a cost, say, for instance, I wanted to go to Churchill Square from wherever, Cashin Avenue, and the Uber cost you whatever price at 1 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon, then you wanted to take the exact same route to go see Shania Twain on a Friday evening at 6 o'clock, there's going to be a different charge, very likely. So for people who've been asking for a long time for ride sharing to come, apparently the approval has now been granted, and Uber is going to launch a local program to get drivers in the coming weeks. Okay, let's keep going. Line number one. Tony, you're on the air.
Good day, sir. How are you today?
Not too bad, thanks,
Hello,
Tony.
Patty. Thank you for taking my call, sir.
No problem.
I thank you for that information you gave me last week about phoning Mr. Fred Hutton in different numbers.
Yeah.
Anyway, just to let you know, I just got a phone call from the man said his name was, I phoned Mr. O'Regan, and he said this man, Mr. John Collins.
Okay.
I was just talking to him for the last 20 minutes, and he got it from Mrs. Cody's office, right? Anyway, he's going to do his darnest to try and get Tony a place to live on his own and get supervision that he needs, like somebody go in and make sure he's okay and taking his pills, and he's going to try and find out why I can't get no information from the Waterford Hospital to let the officers really know what Tony's diagnosed with or what drugs they got now, because we don't know nothing. We're in the dark. He haven't stopped since last week, and I was talking to you yelling and bawling and breaking stuff. But at least I'm still here to tell you that things the ball is starting to roll.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. It's a confusing story right from the get-go. To not be able to understand what diagnosis has been put in place or what type of prescriptions or treatment plan is in place, it just makes no sense to me. If indeed, for instance, if correct me if I'm wrong, Tony, so he's profoundly deaf, his mother is pretty much his voice for him. And
he speaks spokesperson.
Right, and so to not allow her to be in the room when there's conversations happening between doctors or nurses or nurse practitioners and your son makes no sense to me. I mean, we need people to get the information how they understand it. And if that's not through me and you speaking like this, whether it be through American Sign Language or writing things down or whatever the case may be, to not allow your wife to play an active role seems counterintuitive.
We goes down to Waterford, and I'll go with her sometimes, and because Tony don't hardly want me around, but we'll go down there with Sheila. That's was his school teacher one time when the school was open, and Sheila's the interpreter, and Ruby go down, and Ruby's not allowed to go in to ask the questions or what's going on, and Sheila's not allowed to tell us what he's telling the doctor. So we're in the dark for the last 22 years, and I don't understand that part. Tony's a good guy when he's on his medicine right, and he's thinking right. He'll do anything under the sun for you, but right now he's not taking his drugs, and they gave him exactly Sunday passed. The medical team came in and gave Tony a needle in his arm, and he went from a quiet guy when they left to a bulldog. He yelled and bawled and break it. Last time he broke up glasses, and he broke up his expensive pair of glasses, and he opened up a bottle of Pepsi, threw it at the wall, opened up yogurt, threw it at the wall. Whatever drug they're giving is not good for Tony. And when he gets angry like that, he's going to put his fist through my windows in my back door last night, and we stopped him. But if he don't hit something, then he hits me. And it's not his fault. And thanks God to Mr. Collins, he's going to do his best to try and not only get Tony a place, but get supervision to people that go in and talk to him and whatnot, and make sure he takes his drugs in it. So thanks to you, Mr. Johnny, Dave. I'm sorry about that, Patty. Sorry, I'm nervous.
No worries.
Thank you for helping me. And one more thing before I go, I got that off my mind. Can I make one more comment about a different thing?
Sure.
And it is about Mr. Premier Fury. I've been listening. I'm a fanatic reader, and what's going on with this greenhouse thing. I'm going to make a comment because something's supposed to come out today. 6 months after he makes the agreement, makes an announcement that the greenhouse gas is going on the West Coast, 6 months after he's going to be doing like ball and retire from politics. As he's doing the work he's there working for Risley, and instead of working for the people in Newfoundland, which he should be, because we put him in there and I voted for him, and I've always voted Liberal all my life. And I still vote for Liberal because no matter what, it should be helping the people in Newfoundland, not Germany. Anyway, I'm sure I got that off my chest, sir.
Yes, okay. You're welcome to say whatever you please, sir, Tony. I appreciate the update, and hopefully things work out as people have described to you.
Well, if I get a place for him, if he gets a place and he's calmed down and whatnot, I'll give you a call back and I'll give you all updates, sir.
I appreciate the time. Thanks.
Thank you very, very much.
You're welcome. Take care.
I love your show, by the way. I listen to it every day. I wish it was on longer.
I really appreciate that, and please know 3 hours is plenty.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Tony.
Love you. Bye-bye.
All the best. Bye-bye. Let's keep rolling there. Let's go to line number 3. Barry Fordham, you're on the air.
Good morning, Patty. Thanks for taking my call.
No problem.
Talk about the fishery or the river guardian this morning, Patty. Past couple of years now, Paul White and myself been lobbying DFO to extend their season of employment for earlier in the springtime and later in the fall. And past couple of years now, it seems that they haven't been doing anything until we have more or less forced their hand at the 11th hour to keep half the guardians, there'll be about approximately 40 of them, on for an extra 4 weeks. So here we are now in April month. The salmon season is about to begin now another 2 months, we'll say. And still I haven't heard any movement or anything about DFO getting the guardians to start earlier in the season, like May month.
Well, I haven't heard anything either, just so people know what we're talking about. So River Guardians is a plan funded by DFO, but these are people now who don't work for DFO. It's a private company, will get a contract. Last year, I think the value of the contract was $5 million. The problem is there's been fewer Guardians working a limited amount of time when we talk about the entirety of the angling season. So what happens is they've got to do all this work with fewer of them to cover the province's rivers, and by the time they are taken off the rivers, the season is not necessarily over, especially when we talk about poachers. So they know exactly what the schedule is. And if they're willing to use a garden fly, a worm, and or put a net across the river, without these guardians and the lack of presence of some wildlife enforcement officers, we have just opened up a potential window of, haymaking season for the poachers. If the guardians are going to be an effective tool in DFO's tool belt, there's got to be enough of them, and they have to have a long enough season, which includes coming on earlier and staying on later, to make sure that their role is satisfied throughout the entirety of the season. There's no sense having them out there for 75% of the season, because the other 25% is when the real problems happen.
Well said, Patty. That's a great summarization of the issue and the problem. And in the fall time especially, you have the salmon congregate, as you know, and as most people know, at the hedge of the rivers, and the water's shallower, the pools are smaller, and they're just easy pickings for would-be poachers. And I don't see why DFO, in the grand scheme of things, talk about money, a nice few $1 million, which in the grand scheme of things these days is not a lot of money, would provide the ultimate protection, we feel, for the survival and conservation of the salmon.
Because, even if we're talking about the salmon rivers and return numbers, some rivers are still do okay, like in Labrador specifically, but for the vast majority of the rivers on the island, the numbers are woeful. So if DFO is willing to bring forward and talk about the strength of Atlantic salmon stocks and the low returns on the rivers here on the island in particular, and then they want to talk about hook and release and all the rest of it. The fact is, unless we're going to protect the stock based on the precarious nature the stock is in, that would also have to include the river guardians. It's not just talking about warming sea temperatures and phytoplankton and hook and release or all the rest of it. It's got to be all-encompassing, so you can't have one without the other. If the stock is suffering, let's make sure, or struggling, whatever the right word is, if that's the case, and it is, then let's make sure that we do everything we can to preserve it. And I would include into that, conversation regarding proximity of aquaculture to the salmon rivers. Now, the Grieg operations, they've imported sterilized smolt, so that won't be a problem, but there's still plenty of aquaculture sites where we have the potential for a mutant salmon to be swimming up and down that river.
As it already shown that there is a big presence of hybrid salmon on the south coast now already.
Absolutely. So, river guardians, when do they normally start on the river?
I believe, Paddy, 1st June.
1st of June. And this is a little bit.
The problem with that is that you have the runs of large salmon running along the coastline, getting ready to enter rivers and that, and the would-be poachers are placing nets along the coastline and having a detrimental effect as well. If the guardians were hired on, they could be able to patrol the coastline a lot better than what it is now, because there is no patrols. And that's not taking anything away, Paddy, from DFO enforcement or inland wildlife enforcement.
No, fair enough. And in the monitoring of rivers, I probably overstated the health of the rivers in Labrador. I think there's 4 that get counted, 2 were healthy, 1 cautious, maybe 1 in the critical zone. There's 17 that can be counted on the island. I don't think they all got counted last year, but if I remember correctly, the returns were below average on the vast majority of those rivers. So I don't even think they're all assessed. So if there's 17, there was something like 14 or 15 were assessed, and the so-called biomass maximum sustainable yield, I think is the phrase that they throw around, it was down almost across the board. So we have seen pretty woeful numbers. On some rivers where we've in the past have seen tens of thousands of returns are minuscule returns. Conn River comes to mind. So anything else, Barry, before I take a break for the news?
Well, Paddy, on another note, I think Minister Davis is making the big decision today on the wind turbine project, and I just like to say that a couple of years ago, I was involved with the lobby effort against the Lewisport proposal with the Wind Synergy program, and Minister Davis, and the government turned that one down. I don't know if it's going to turn it down, but I wish that they take a closer look at all this. And as I said before, Paddy, when I was talking about it, the blades of the turbines once they're no longer effective, they're not recyclable. You can't do anything with them as technology states right now, and they just get laid down. I've seen pictures around the world. The blades are laid down like graveyard on turbines. It seems like it's an awful lot of turbines to be erected, and the sizes are monumental. And it just seems, I know it's maybe a year or 2 years been talked about, but it's going to be a monumental decision, and it could have detrimental effects not only to the environment but to the people in Newfoundland and Labrador as well.
I don't think it's accurate to say that they're 100% not reusable or recyclable. There's all sorts of work going on to try to use more of the recyclable materials that make up the components of a wind turbine. But you're right. Over the years, it's been lay them down, bury them in a landfill. And if we're talking about green, burying fiberglass is not necessarily green. Now, fiberglass itself is not totally recyclable. That's absolutely for sure. But there's plenty of work being done to try to green that up. And that's the industry itself, because you're right. Whether we talk about coming up with the minerals and the components to build them in the first place, all the lubricants required on site, and then disposal in their end of life, which is in and around 30 years for the most part for these wind turbines. But you're right. But there's some of the very fine strands of plastic and glass are hard to break apart to use as a recyclable, but there's apparently some work going on. Now, I'm going to have a look during the newscast here now to see exactly what the update might be on that front, because you're right. I mean, how green can it be that 30 years later we're just going to bury them at Robin Hood Bay or wherever?
Paddy, in closing about it, I would say that if this is such a great industry to be involved with, if this is such a great thing, why is Newfoundland and Labrador picked to head it up when Newfoundland and Labrador is usually the last place that technology catches on to?
Well, because the technology won't be utilised for our benefit, which is one of the problems people have about these proposals. The argument made, and this is not me making it, these are the proponents making it, is we have the wind and we have the water, and we have the deep sea ports in close proximity to what seems to be the market in the European Union, notably Germany at this moment in time. So, yeah, it just pops in my head. It's beyond fiberglass. I think they're talking about using thermoplastics possibly as a replacement material for wind turbines, which, of course, is much more easily reused, repurposed, or recycled. Barry, I appreciate the time. A bit late for the news, but thanks for calling.
Thank you very much, Paddy. It's always been a pleasure.
My pleasure. You take care. All right, bye-bye. All right, let's take a break for the news. When we come back, tons of time to speak with you on a topic entirely up to you. Don't go away.
The Tim Powers Show. Join the conversation weekday afternoons at 4 p.m. on your VOCM.
Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 2. Marilyn, you're on the air.
Good morning, Patty. Thank you so much for taking my call this morning.
No problem.
I just want to talk about the decision coming up today by Minister Bernard Davis. What decisions were made at the cabin in the backwoods sometimes should stay at the cabin. I've always said from day one this proposal should have never seen the light of day, because it's such a massive undertaking, and it will have detrimental effects on the people and the environment on the Port-au-Port Peninsula. The size of these turbines, 654 feet on mountaintops, and the amount of explosives and the damage it'll do to our water systems. These are ammonia, nitrate, explosives. It'll contaminate our ground. It'll contaminate our water, and we won't be able to live there, Patty, with the health effects. There's no doubt in my mind that it will have detrimental effects on our lives and the environment. So I would stress to the minister, please, stop this project in its tracks, because it will be very harmful to the people. And, these elected officials need to have a moral compass to put this kind of project on the people is wrong on all levels, and especially where we're Indigenous people. The majority of people on the Port-au-Port Peninsula are Indigenous, and it's like you're coming in and raping our land again and our resources, and it's just wrong, and they need to stop. They really do. When you talk about reconciliation and all this, that's baloney when you try to impose this kind of project on the people. And I just wanted to say that this morning. And, shame on Seamus O'Regan for trying to push this through on a federal level and saying that Risley's in a hurry. Well, Risley doesn't mean nothing to us. He's a stranger. He is a subsidy harvester along with the other players that are in here trying to rape our land and our resources from us. For what? For Germany. We're not going to get anything out of this. The provincial government said they will be paying back the company in 20 years, or they're getting money from the company in 20 years. This project may not be even viable in 20 years. And so what are we getting out of this? We're not getting anything out of this, except, their back cabin deals and whatever they've set up, drinking their Remy Martin or whatever it is these elected officials drink when they're alone at the cabin. But this is nothing for the people of Newfoundland and Labrador, and certainly nothing for the people of Port-au-Port, Codroy Valley, and Central and Burin and wherever else they're proposing these mega projects. So that is all I want to say this morning.
So, Marilyn, the fact that it is for export, which is absolutely true, would you have different thoughts on it if it was for domestic use? Because if the concern is environmental, then the environmental concerns don't change whether or not it's for export or domestic use.
No, it doesn't matter, Patty. This is too intrusive. Doesn't matter what the end product is for. If it was for to run the Maritime Link or to Muskrat Falls, because that's a big failure, another big boondoggle. But it doesn't matter what they were using it for, the end product. It's the fact that this is too big and this is too intrusive and shouldn't be in our backyard. It shouldn't be in anybody's backyard. And the fact that this government thinks it's okay to put this in somebody's backyard is wrong on so many levels. I cannot stress it enough. And it's not only me, Patty. You've heard it from all over Newfoundland. People are coming out and they're expressing their concerns. I would say 95% of your callers that call in are stating this is wrong, this is not the way it should go, and you need to be very, very careful on the decisions you make going forward, because it's going to have detrimental effects. It's not just me, Patty, and I got to live with it. So
Understood. I appreciate the time. Look, I have no earthly idea what the percentage of people for or against this project will be. World Energy will tell you one number, Protect NL will tell you another number, and they are completely diametrically opposed to each other, those numbers. So I don't know. And in the concept of social license, which I think is, one of those phrases we throw around, but what it means, everyone has a different definition in their mind. If social license is very much like how we elect politicians, 50% plus one, then I wonder where we are in the Port-au-Port Peninsula. It's remarkable to me that we hear from some folks on the Burin Peninsula regarding Everwind very little conversation coming out of the Exploits Valley proposal, very little conversation associated with Pattern Energy at the Port of Argentia, but tons on World Energy. And we'll see what the Minister has to say at whatever time today, because my understanding is today is the deadline, and we're going to hear something one way or the other.
Yeah, we're going to be the first, and it's going to be the worst if they go through with this. So that's all I want to say. Thank you so much for putting up with us, letting us having a platform to discuss this very important issue. And I cannot praise your show enough and your commentary. So thank you so much, Patty. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
And look, I mean, we've heard a lot about it, and I'm really looking forward to getting some further information from the provincial government here. And yes, put it this way, regardless of what Minister Davis says today, final investment decision for John Risley or anybody else is not going to happen until the federal government figures things out. If they're looking at cost recovery, and if they're looking at tax subsidies, which of course they are, then until we know what the feds really mean by access to the variance between 15% and 40% in the terms of tax credits, that's all going to rely firmly on the definition of green. There's no such thing as pure green energy in the world, period. We might as well get that out of the way. So we have to use the comparisons because Everwind is proceeding in Nova Scotia, and they don't have a final investment decision made either, because if Nova Scotia, which would like a really loose definition of green, why? Because it's to their benefit, because the government of Nova Scotia is seemingly in on these onshore wind projects as well. So if Nova Scotia, in comparison to this province, is going to be the benchmark or the two comparative provinces to come up with a definition. In this province, access to our public grid, which we don't know how that works. We don't know how much we're going to charge World Energy GH2 for power they need. We don't know how much they're going to charge us for power flowing back to our grid in the concept of net metering. Because if in Nova Scotia, interaction with the public grid means about 58% of that province's electricity is generated by coal or coke. In this province, we're about 80% renewables. So huge disparity between the two, which would mean a huge disparity between the percentage of tax credits available to Everwind there and Everwind here, if and when these projects happen. And in the concept of what we get, a lot of the jobs, of course, are short-term during the construction phase. Long-term permanent jobs in the operational phase, of course, vastly reduced. We'll see what those numbers boil out if indeed these things proceed. With the access to Crown lands, wind electricity, water use, and water royalties. Here's just some of the numbers. This is not in an effort to sell, this is in an effort to inform. So thankfully, the province has chosen not to sell Crown land. They're going to lease Crown land for very specific purposes. They can't lease the Crown land and move away from this current proposal to bring in some sort of different business. It would be required in a different application process, period. Crown land fees. Annual charge of 3.5% of the market value of reserved lands. Annual charge of 7% of the market value of leased lands. And that's, of course, all applicable to all Crown lands. The wind electricity tax, interesting. $4,000 per megawatt on installed capacity. There's an annual charge payable at in-service. Then this would be applicable to all wind projects greater than 5 megawatts, produce electricity for the purpose of producing hydrogen, and of course ammonia as the vessel for transportation and off it goes. The water usage fee is a fee of $500 per 1,000 cubic meters of water licensed and used. A fee of $50,000 per 1,000 cubic meters for water licensed and not used. This is applicable to all hydrogen facilities, regardless where we're talking. There's permanent insurance as part of an annual charge. The fees are adjusted based on CPI, which is the Canadian Consumer Price Index, and that's all per Minister Davis's ministerial portfolio. The water royalty. This is a tricky one for many people. Of course, cost recovery is the key when we talk about the water royalty, of which they're going to lose copious amounts of water. The payments begin only when costs are recovered in full. The payable based on the calculated residual value of the water, so it's directly linked with revenue over specific amounts of time. In what they call the Tier 1, 2, and 3. and the R factor. So that means one rate equals 10% applied after 1 times cost recovery. So they're talking about $12 billion for World Energy GH2. The first layer of water royalty is not going to be charged and collected until they've had cost recovery times 1. The second rate is 20% applied after 2 times cost recovery. So $24 billion in recouped revenue for World Energy GH2 before we move on to the 20%. Rate number 3, 25%, and of course that's after 3 times cost recovery, $36 billion of revenue coming in the door before we get to tier 3. So those are some, I would suggest, pretty small numbers. Now the government will tell you over the course of 25 to 30 years, the total revenues to the province, including the royalties, wind electricity tax, water use fee, crown land fees, jobs created, expanded tax base that comes with it, is in the neighborhood of $11 billion. Now, that's their numbers once again. We don't know when Minister Davis is going to make his announcement today, but it's going to be highly anticipated, especially in the pockets of the province where these proponents are currently kicking the proverbial wind tires. Let's take our final break of the morning. When we come back, still time for you. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. So it looks like some pretty good voter turnout in the early days of advanced voting out in Fogo Island, Cape Friels. So on day number 1, 732 votes cast between Carmenville, Change Islands, Fogo Island Centre and Wesleyville. Of course, the election itself takes place next Monday on the 15th. I was just trying to get an idea about what the number of voters were in the 2021 general election. So let's see here. Very quick calculation. And not exactly sure how many registered voters would be in Fogo Island, Cape Friels, but the collective voter turnout numbers, not percentage of, was 4,113 in the last general election. Of course, Derek Bragg was the Liberal member, the late Derek Bragg. He garnered 2,511 of the votes. Sue Collins represented the PCs, got 1,507, and Jim Gill, who's running again for the NDP, got 95 votes last time around. So pretty solid turnout for first day of advanced polling. By-elections, generally speaking, have pretty woeful voter turnouts, and I think we're sliding towards that exact characterization of voter turnout even in the general elections. I mean, you look at the most recent by-election on the federal scene, it was wicked low. So anyway, that number is out there for consideration. I brought this up earlier in the week, and it's about the continued cleanup out in Cape St. George. So there was 3 main roads that were shut down, whether it be the Bruises Brook Road, which has now reopened. It was a week later. Then the other 2, which is Marchers Point and Stanley Rose. So the thought was, when we saw the visuals of the culverts being washed away after significant rainfall, is now they're, of course, with the repair, going to install larger culverts with larger capacity, and in this case, 27% larger capacity with the new culverts. The thought is, and the question was, we know that for places that have aging infrastructure, culverts that have been in the ground for 40, 50 years, it's been proven time and time again, they're not up to the significant rainfalls and the amount of water they need to be able to handle before we see roads washed out. So the thought is, what's the cost in the aftermath? The extensive cleanup and the replacement of roads that have been washed away versus if we get out in front of it and we try to replace some of those old culverts with these larger capacity culverts before we endure the frustration, the anxiety, the increased travel time and the cost of repairing and replacing roadwork and the culverts themselves. You would think that with minimal interruption in the area, that even if it's one-lane traffic for a little while during the paving season, if we get out in front of it and identify where these smaller culverts are in place and replace them before it's a necessary evil after the road's been washed away, I think there's potential savings to be had there. I mean, we see it. Well, we've seen these examples many, many times. You don't need to go back to the Fionas or the Igors of the world. Just that rainfall out in Cape St. George was enough to bring forward a massive bill. In addition to that, you know, we hear people talk about the struggles to pay bills and keep the wolf away from the door and to feed their families, and it's all very real for some people. Then it's whether or not you think you can afford home insurance. It's not for me to tell you how to spend your money, right? It's your money. But to see the pictures of people who have had their homes ravaged by this runoff, you know, we saw the visuals of the water rushing in through the front door, the dozens of people that had the basements flooded out, and some of which, I don't know what the percentage is, but were not carrying home insurance. And so, as opposed to, going through your insurance company, putting in a claim, getting some support to renovate, rebuild, they don't have it. And so what's the only alternative? to take photos and submit them, whether it be through Mayor Cornick's office or directly to the provincial government, because if you don't have the money for insurance, very likely you don't have the money to repair your home. And so then what? Then it becomes an issue that the provincial government is going to have to deal with. Add to it, there are still people right now still trying to navigate that rebuild out in Port aux Basques and other communities that were on the receiving end of post-tropical storm Fiona. So the turnaround is notoriously slow. And so what do people do between now and then? And whether or not the province is actually going to be able to or want to or willing to come through with some monies for said repairs. Because I've seen some of the pictures. It's really quite devastating for some of these families and their homes. All right, let's check it out on the Twitter. Or VOCM Openline, follow us there. Now, again, regardless of who you are, where you are in this province, people will have different positions on all sorts of policies and all sorts of so-called mega projects. If someone has a question about how, and this one caller who was 100% all in on these hydrogen plays, and fair enough. But he had problem with the caller talking about how green can one sector of the energy business be. I think we can all agree, if we're being honest, that there's no such thing as 100% green energy. There's just not. It all comes with some sort of cost, whether it be in the mining of the minerals to make something, right? Whether it be how the construction phase works, what kind of lubricants and otherwise are in play, whether it be the impact of deforestation or devegetation, there's always going to be an impact here. So, trying to deduce what are the greener options is a pragmatic conversation. It doesn't mean that we can't, we don't have to be all in or all out. Many people are. Some people might be sitting on the Port Peninsula thinking, I could use a job. And so they have to be factored into this whole conversation as well. And we'll see what Minister Davis has to say today. All right, good show. Big thanks to all hands who support the program. And we will indeed pick up this conversation again tomorrow morning, right here on VOCM and Big Land FM's Open Line. On behalf of the producer, David Williams, I'm your host, Paddy Daly. Have yourself a safe, fun, happy day. We'll talk in the morning. Bye-bye.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.